The initial glimpse of the shadow led me to believe it was merely a play of light. However, as the nights unfolded, I came to understand that the darkness in my room held a gaze, and it was fixated on me. I've always been someone who sleeps lightly. Even the faintest sound or shift would rouse me from sleep, resulting in heavy eyelids and a gloomy disposition the following day. When I began waking up in the middle of the night without any clear reason, I attributed it to the pressures of my new job. On one of those early mornings, I experienced something unusual. As I lay in bed, attempting to drift back to sleep, a flicker of movement caught my attention from the corner of my eye. I turned my head slowly, anticipating the sight of the curtains dancing in the gentle breeze from the open window. In its place, a shadowy silhouette loomed in the corner of my room. My heart raced, and I shot up, frantically searching for the lamp. When I finally switched on my nightstand, the corner lay vacant. I rose from my bed and peered behind the dresser, my heart racing at the thought of an intruder lurking in the shadows. In this world, the following nights unfolded peacefully, allowing me to unwind. Maybe it had just been a vivid dream. However, about a week later, I found myself awake once more in the dead of night. In that moment, I felt an unmistakable presence. The shadow had come back, inching nearer. At the foot of my bed stood a shadowy figure, its form vaguely human yet shrouded in darkness, absorbing the meager light of the room, its eyes glinting with an unsettling presence. His eyes burned with a sinister red hue, locking onto me with an intensity that sent a chilling shiver down my spine. I felt an overwhelming urge to scream, to run, to escape the paralyzing grip of fear, yet my body remained unresponsive. I stood frozen, my gaze locked on the shadowy figure as it gradually lifted an arm, reaching out towards me. With fingers elongated and razor-sharp, just as those ethereal digits were about to make contact, I found the strength to break free. The paralysis I moved suddenly, backing up until I hit the headboard and covering it. It was a disaster. The dark circles under my eyes gave away my sleepless night, and I jumped at any sudden noise. My coworkers noticed it, asking me if I felt right, dismissal with vague excuses about insomnia. That same afternoon, on the way home, I passed by an esoteric store. I had never believed too much in crystals or sage sumerios, but I was willing to try everything. The owner, a woman with a kind face and long silver hair, listened patiently to me as I described what I had seen, carefully framing it as a recurring nightmare. Instead of admitting that I thought my apartment might be haunted, "It seems that you have an unwanted visitor, my dear," she said sympathetically. "The so-called shadow beings are unpleasant creatures. They feed on fear and negative energy. They sold me crystals of protection, bunches of sage and a dream catcher. I felt a little silly buying everything, but the weight of the bag in my hand gave me a strange sense of security. That night I performed the whole ritual, burned sage in every room, placed glass in every window and door, and hung the dream catcher over my bed. The apartment smelled like a hippie commune, but I felt safer than in the day. I should have known that it wasn't. It was all too simple. The shadow returned that very night, and this time I was filled with rage. The sound of glass shattering jolted me awake. My eyes flew open to find the dream catcher in pieces on the floor, crystals strewn about the room, and there, looming over me, the shadow had taken on a more defined presence, transforming from a mere vague outline into a distinct shape in a chasm of darkness. Her eyes blazed with an otherworldly fury. I attempted to move, to flee, but my body betrayed me. It felt like sleep paralysis, magnified 100-fold, for I was acutely aware that I was fully awake. The shadow inched nearer. Had I been human, I would have sensed her breath brushing against my skin. Her voice permeated my thoughts. It wasn't through my ears that I heard her, but rather in the very core of my existence. "You can't escape me," she whispered now. "I am a part of you." Chilled sensations traced along my jawline, prompting a deep groan to escape my lips. The touch seared like frostbite, etching a path of agony in its wake. "Absolutely," I murmured, my voice trembling. "What is it that you desire?" The shadow elongated her mouth into a twisted grin. Finally, I drifted into unconsciousness and awoke the following morning to sunlight streaming into my room. For a fleeting instant, I allowed myself to think that the birds outside were somehow intertwined with my nightmare. As I gazed upon the shattered dream catcher and the shards of glass strewn about, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A series of red marks lined my jaw, precisely where those ethereal fingers had made contact. It was undeniably real. Everything was genuine. I reached out to work and informed them that I was unwell. All day was dedicated to delving into the mysteries of shadow beings and uncovering their essence. I discovered that it frightened me even more. While much of what I encountered was just paranormal forum chatter, a few accounts unsettlingly mirrored my own experience. Individuals recounted comparable experiences, noting the piercing red eyes, the sensation of immobility, and how the entity gradually took on a more tangible form. A specific poll piqued my interest. The author asserted they had successfully expelled a shadow being, yet cautioned that the procedure was fraught with danger. These, the greater your fear, the more powerful they will grow. To conquer them, you must confront your most profound fears and rise above them. It appeared rather foolish. It was a new era, and that night I was open to exploring every possibility. I didn't rely on sage or crystals. Instead, I settled cross-legged on my bed, in anticipation. The afternoon was dedicated to meditation, as I sought to uncover a wellspring of inner strength that felt elusive. I was certain that the shadow would inevitably make its presence known. In that moment, it emerged in the corner of my room, its hate-filled eyes locked onto me. "I'm not afraid of you," I declared, astonished by the strength in my voice, even as fear surged through me. The shadow chuckled, a noise reminiscent of glass cracking within my thoughts. "As I savor your fear, nourish me. It has arrived, and I resisted the instinct to retreat. I might acknowledge my fear, but I won't let you dictate my actions. Welcome to my space, my life here. You hold no power over me." The shadow came to a halt. In that fleeting moment, I caught a glimmer of uncertainty in those infernal eyes. Suddenly, he surged forward, his ghostly hands reaching for my throat. I remained still, my gaze fixed on his terrifying visage as his icy fingers tightened around my throat. "I am stronger than my fear," I whispered, struggling to catch my breath. "I possess greater strength than you do." The tension mounted. Dark specks twirled at the periphery of my sight. I kept my gaze steady, immersing myself in the blissful memories that filled my mind. Celebrating my birthdays as a child and the momentous occasion of my college graduation while enjoying Sundays with my friends, I took a moment to reflect on the cherished individuals in my life and the ambitions I continue to pursue. I embrace life, Jade. I embrace the light. This is not your space. The shadow danced like a glitch on a screen. Her hold faltered, and I inhaled a gasp of urgent air. "No component placement," she grunted, her voice fading into a whisper. "You belong to me," I went. "What about the head?" "I will never go back to the shadows from which you emerged." "Absolutely not. We're glad to have you with us." The shadow morphed and writhed, elongating and reshaping itself. Its crimson eyes shone with an intense brilliance. For a brief instant, I was consumed by the dread of having made a grave error. But then, like smoke in the wind, it began to fade. "This isn't over," she growled, her voice trailing off. "I'll always come back. I'll always come back, and I'll always be ready," I replied firmly, unleashing one last inhuman shriek. The shadow vanished. I remained there for what felt like an eternity, trembling with adrenaline and relief. A part of me feared that if I moved, if I let my guard down for even a moment. As the minutes ticked by and the first light of dawn crept through my window, I finally let myself unwind. It was over for now. In the days that followed, I remained vigilant, diligently kept a dream journal to capture any strange occurrences, practiced meditation, and confronted my fears in various areas of my life. And yes, I made sure to have some sage nearby, just in case, but the shadow did not return. It occasionally returns in the dead of night. A fleeting glimpse catches my attention, a shadowy flicker where nothing should exist. Yet, each time I turn to investigate, I find only emptiness waiting in its place. I can't say for certain if it's lost for good. Perhaps I'm simply waiting for the right moment, looking for a crack in its armor, but one thing is clear. I am now more resilient. Anything that attempts to pull me back into the shadows will find me prepared to confront it. Ultimately, the most brilliant light creates the deepest shadows, and I intend to radiate from the instant I step into that apartment. Something felt off. An unsettling heaviness lingered in the air, a stillness that seemed out of place. Yet, I was on the hunt for an affordable spot near campus, and I couldn't afford to be choosy. Little did I realize, I was on the brink of becoming an unsuspecting player in my roommate's perilous fixation. I'm Alexis, and this is the story of how my college journey spiraled into a nightmare. The early days passed without much excitement, as my roommate Jade seemed amiable, calm, and introspective, often lost in the pages of her books. The unusual ambience of the apartment was, at first, something I linked to the building's vintage charm and my own nervousness about starting this new chapter in my life. However, that's when the unusual occurrences began. Initially, they were minor elements. The coffee table featured an open book filled with unfamiliar symbols, surrounded by candles that remained unscathed by time. A faint scent of incense lingered in the air, persisting even in my absence. At first, I brushed off these details as merely my partner's quirky habits. Suddenly, the situation intensified, and I found myself waking up in the dead of night to see Jade standing in the room. As I faced her, my bedroom door seemed to observe me, whispering an apology for her sleepwalking before quietly slipping back into her room. After experiencing it repeatedly, I decided to start locking my door at night. One evening, I returned home early from a study group and discovered Jade in the living room. Enveloped by the soft glow of candles, she whispered in an unfamiliar tongue. Upon seeing me, she was taken aback, quickly extinguished the candles, and picked up. "I'm sorry," he said, avoiding my gaze. "I never expected to see you back here so quickly. It's simply a meditation practice." Despite my desire to trust him, an unsettling chill ran down my spine, revealing that I had stumbled upon something I was never meant to witness. After that night, the unusual occurrences escalated. Items shifted on their own when I turned away, faint whispers echoed from vacant rooms, and shadows glided silently across the floor, devoid of any light source to illuminate them. I attempted to discuss it with Jade, yet I consistently minimized my concerns. "Old buildings emit strange sounds," I remarked, "or even worse, perhaps the pressure of exams is weighing on you," but I sensed there was something deeper at play. There was an unsettling sensation of being observed, a constant awareness that lingered even in solitude. The atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating, as if an unseen force was bearing down on me. Then came the night that transformed everything. I also woke up with the chanting echoed with an intensity that filled the air, chilling the room to an unbearable cold. My breath hung in the darkness like wispy clouds, each exhale a reminder of the growing frenzy around me. It wasn't just Jade's voice I heard. There were others, unsettling and out of place. Heart racing, I stepped out of my room, and what awaited me in the living room left me speechless. The furniture had been shoved aside, creating a stark emptiness in the center of the room. A circle etched into the ground, seemingly marked with blood. Jade stood at its center, arms lifted high, surrounded by candles that hovered mysteriously in the air. To make matters worse, shadows swirled and danced ominously around him. They transcended humanity. They were entities forged from pure darkness, deeper than the night itself. They contorted and molded, resembling openings in the very fabric of reality. "Jade," I let out a scream. Her eyes were an abyss of blackness. All eyes were on me as she began to speak. Her voice was a cacophony, a blend of countless voices merging into one unsettling sound. "You really shouldn't be here," Alexis whispered. "Return to your room and erase that memory from your mind." Yet, I found myself frozen, unable to do anything but watch in terror as one of those shadows broke free from the circle and began to approach me. "Heidi, hold your breath. Don't cause her any harm." But alas, it was already too late. The shadow had shifted. I reached out, and in that instant, I was confronted with visions no one should ever witness. An endless abyss, nightmarish beings lurking in the shadows, an overwhelming sense of pain, isolation, and dread. A chilling cold seeped into my very core, and then I screamed. The details of what followed are a blur. All I recall is waking up curled in a corner, my throat raw from the cries that had escaped me. The shadows had vanished, the candles snuffed out, and there was Heidi beside me, her eyes brimming with remorse. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice heavy with regret. She hadn't intended for any of this to unfold. Jade had shared her fascination with the occult, her experiments with rituals and invocations. But upon moving into this apartment, she uncovered a nexus of energies, a convergence of mystical forces that drew her in, captivating her completely. She had tried everything, little spells, attempts to communicate with the other side, but it became clear that she wasn't the one in control. The power was using her. "They've been feeding me," she confessed, trembling. "They've grown stronger, and now I don't know how to stop them." A wave of regret washed over her as she thought, "I should have packed my things and run away." But when I glanced at her, fear gripped me. I couldn't abandon her. We were in this together now. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of research and preparation. We pored over ancient texts and sought out experts in the paranormal, only to discover that the beings Jade had summoned wouldn't surrender easily. They attacked us in our dreams, whispering promises and threats, trying to confront us. The apartment turned menacing, doors banged shut, lights flickered ominously, and shadows crept along the walls even in the bright light of day. Everything reached a peak on the night of the autumn equinox. The veil between worlds was destined to grow thinner, presenting us with our greatest opportunity. To close the portal that Jade had opened, we drew a circle of protection with salt and iron. Jade began the ritual, her voice firm despite the fear. I stayed outside the circle, protecting her with holy water and a handful of sacred words. The wings became a whirlwind of darkness, the shadows attacked, furious to be banished, but we stood firm with one last cry of anger. The portal closed and everything came back to normal. The apartment was no longer cursed. Jade and I are still friends, but we never talked about what happened that night. I still live in that apartment. Someday will think I'm crazy, but I feel safe because now I know that there is out there and I know how to face it, because the real power is not in the rituals or in the spells. It is in the strength that we find within ourselves, and that, no shadow, it can snatch it from us. The rustling of dry leaves under my boots was the only sound in the eerie stillness of the forest until I heard the whispers, at first faint, as the whisper of the wind through the bare branches. But with each step I took further into the forest they became clearer. I had not planned to be here so late. What began as a simple daytime walk turned into something else altogether. As I wandered, I discovered an overgrown trail that had somehow escaped my notice until now. My curiosity piqued, I felt compelled to follow it, promising myself a brief exploration before heading back. What began as a few minutes stretched into hours. The trail wound its way through increasingly thick vegetation, with towering trees intertwining above me, nearly obscuring the afternoon sun. I ought to have turned back in that instant. An undeniable force propelled me onward. It felt as though the very essence of the forest was leading me to a destination unknown. As twilight descended, clarity emerged at last. The sight before me brought me to a halt amidst the dry rows of weathered tombstones, standing in neat lines, their presence barely discernible among the towering grass and unruly weeds. Some were askew, others had completely detached, but there was no mistaking what it was. As I made my way to the closest tombstone in this secluded cemetery, hidden deep within the forest, I gently cleared away the thick moss to uncover a date, 1843. My heart raced with excitement as I uncovered something incredible. It was hard to believe. This spot seems to have been untouched for over 100 years, a relic of the past now beautifully overtaken by nature. For the next hour, I meticulously explored the cemetery, capturing every detail I could find. Before the light faded completely, I captured images with my phone camera. Many inscriptions were too worn to decipher, yet I managed to make out a few names and dates. The most recent date I discovered was from 1902, deepening the mystery. What could have led an entire community to abandon its dead? As I lifted my gaze from a captivating tombstone, it struck me just how dark it had become. I had come back. The trees that once appeared charming now loomed ominously, their branches contorting like twisted fingers. A chill coursed through me as I understood that I was utterly lost in the darkness, with no clue how to return to the main path. Then I caught a whisper, so delicate I nearly dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. Yet it grew clearer, this time a name uttered with such urgency that it tightened a knot within me. My stomach twisted unexpectedly, anticipating the sight of another hiker who, for some inexplicable reason, had also wandered into this forsaken cemetery. Yet the area remained as desolate as it had been throughout the afternoon. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the stillness, surrounded by silence, with only the encroaching darkness and the elongated shadows of the tombstones for company. I chuckled awkwardly, attempting to shake off the unsettling sensation that settled in my chest. "Help me find my peace." I mentioned that it's merely a product of your imagination. It was time for me to make my exit. I would choose to wander aimlessly through the woods over spending even one night in this place. I reached for my phone to activate the flashlight, only to discover that the battery was completely drained. Absolutely flawless. I made my way to what I believed was the trail, picking up the pace. Once more I caught the sound. This time it wasn't merely a single voice. It was a chorus of whispers, layered upon one another, growing louder with every step I took. I rushed, my heart pounding in my chest. My rational mind attempted to rationalize the rustling leaves in the breeze, maybe, or the faint rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Yet, beneath it all, I understood it was something far deeper. The sound of Rama rustling behind me prompted a quick turn. For just a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of something shifting. A fleeting glimpse of pale white in the shadows vanished with a blink. The whispers transformed into names, dates, and shards of fragmented conversations. It felt as though the entire cemetery had awakened, each grave recounting its tale. 1964 fever claimed them all. "Sarah, my dear Sarah, what made you overlook us?" I dashed forward. I had lost all concern. My only desire was to discover the correct path. Additionally, I simply wanted to escape from. As I ventured further into the underbrush, the branches grazed my face, bringing a wave of discomfort. Then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I fell, rolled down the hill, branches and leaves, tearing my skin until I landed with a thud on my back. I stood there breathless, the world swirling around me. The whispers faded away. The forest fell back into absolute silence save for the beats racing in my ears. With effort I sat trying to find my bearings. I had fallen into what looked like the dry bed of a stream. The smooth stones shone dimly under the dim moonlight and a few meters from me. There was something that made my blood freeze in my veins, a skull half buried in the earth, his mouth in an eternal grimace. I immediately recoiled, my hands colliding against. I looked down and saw my fingers wrapped around a femur, the bone bleached by time. The whispers came back louder, more urgent, and with them the sound of slow, measured footsteps approaching from the top of the ravine. I held my breath and pressed myself against the dirt wall, praying that whatever was above me wouldn't see me. The footsteps stopped right at the edge under the faint light from the moon. A figure emerged from the shadows. He appeared human, yet there was an unsettling fluidity to his movements that felt off. As he descended into the dry creek bed, it struck me with a chilling clarity. He seemed to defy the very laws of physics. I could see right through him, a specter in the fading light. What else could he possibly be? A man stood before me, clad in attire that felt almost contemporary. Her face bore the marks of weariness, eyes deep-set and shadowed. Yet it was the message in her gaze that captivated me. "You shouldn't be here," she warned, her voice resonating oddly in the stillness of the night. This place is not for the living. A surge of panic coursed through me, urging me to flee, to cry out, to take action, yet my body remained frozen. All I could do was observe. As additional figures materialized from the shadows, ethereal silhouettes of men, women, and children appeared, each adorned in garments from various time periods, yet sharing a common expression of profound remorse. A woman in a Civil War-era dress whispered, "We've waited so long," her hands clasped in front of her, a figure lost to time and abandoned by the world. "Yet here you are," an old man remarked, his ghostly hand extending toward me. "You have the power to share our tale, guaranteeing that we will finally be remembered." I found my voice again, though. A faint murmur escaped. "Who or what?" As the first ghost glided by, the man took a bold step forward. He proclaimed that we were the pioneers of this valley. We sought a brighter future, yet all we encountered were struggles and loss. The disease claimed them all, the woman added. Children, the elderly, no one was spared. The old man continued, "Those who survived left, but we were trapped here." A wave of compassion washed over me. These were not malevolent spirits, they were merely lost souls, overlooked and forgotten. Anticipating recognition, I declared, "I feel," my voice steady and resolute, catching even myself off guard. I was completely unaware that this place was here. The elderly gentleman nodded with a grave expression. "Your presence here is essential to revive our history for the world to see, guiding us toward peace." I looked at the ghostly faces around me, each one carrying the burden of an unspoken story as a historian. This wasn't quite the vision I had always imagined, a forgotten piece of history eager to be uncovered. They shared their stories with met-air joys and sorrows, the fever that swept through their community, the tales of those who survived and those who did not. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, the ghosts of their past began to dissolve. The final words were spoken by the man who would be the last to depart. "Thank you," he expressed in his nearly translucent manner. "Remember your promise. Share our story," and just like that, they vanished. After hours of navigating my way back, I realized that the story I held on to became an invaluable treasure in the months that followed. I committed myself to thorough research, meticulously reviewing historical records, exploring genealogies, and reconstructing them with precision. I ultimately brought my findings to publication. The cemetery has been revived. Its history and souls are brought back to life. In the quiet moments of dawn, I sense whispers carried by the breeze, transformed into expressions of gratitude. Deep within, I feel a profound assurance that they have discovered their tranquility. The mind's darkness wrapped around us like a heavy cloak, our lanterns struggled to cut through the suffocating void. We thought we were prepared for adventure, yet we had no inkling that the very land would capture my heart for eternity. What began as a straightforward expedition turned into an exciting opportunity for Jake and me to indulge our passion for urban exploration, all while capturing stunning photos for our blog. Decades of abandonment had left the old Hollister mine shrouded in mystery, its tunnels rumored to extend for miles. Beneath the mountain, whispers of local legends spoke of gold betas, still concealed in the depths, patiently awaiting the arrival of the braver, perhaps the foolish, who dare to seek them out. Jake and I undoubtedly belong to that second group. We've been best friends since our college days. Driven by our shared enthusiasm for delving into forgotten locations and revealing their untold stories, we adventured through desolate factories and decaying mansions, yet we had yet to set foot in a mine. Thrills ignited our spirits, awakening a sense of vitality that our mundane jobs could never provide. We reached the mine's entrance right as the sun dipped low on the horizon, stretching shadows across the untamed clearing. The mine's entrance loomed in the mountain, a dark gaping maw, with its weathered wooden supports barely discernible in the encroaching twilight. "Ready for this, Jack Cast?" Jake asked with his characteristic arrogant smile. I nodded, ignoring the knot in my stomach. "Let's go." We lit our flashlights and took the first step into the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately, and the air was filled with the smell of damp earth and old wood. Our footsteps echoed against the stone walls, the sound absorbed by the immensity of the tunnels. For the first hour everything went according to plan. We followed the main tunnel, marveling at the old abandoned mining equipment and the flashes of quartz embedded in the walls. Jake was taking pictures while I consulted the map marking our progress, but as we went along, we followed the main tunnel. Something started to feel strange. The air became heavier, harder to breathe. Our flashlights seemed to lose intensity, as if the darkness was getting denser around us and the silence was absolute. We could only hear our own breathing and the crunch of the gravel under our feet. "Hey, Alex," Jake's voice sounded tense. "You don't feel something strange?" He was about to respond when I saw him. A movement in the darkness in front of us. I froze, my heart beating in my throat. "Jake whispered, you saw that?" He nodded, his pale face under the light of the flashlight. What was before he could answer, we heard a low rumble like distant thunder. The ground underfoot began to shake. "An earthquake?" Jake asked with panic in his voice. But this was not an earthquake. The rumble intensified, and with it came a sound that I'll never forget, the creaking of rocks sliding over each other as if the mountain itself was moving. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling it back. We shot out of the tunnel, our flashlights walking with each step, casting frantic shadows on the walls. The roar around us grew, and I heard the creak of the wooden beams suddenly giving way. The ground disappeared beneath us. We fell, rolled into the darkness, surrounded because of the roar of the collapse. I felt a blow on my head, and then nothing. I don't know how long I was unconscious when I woke up. There was only darkness, and the taste of blood in my mouth hurt my head and my whole body. Burned with pain, Jake called my voice. Harsh, a moan answered me to my left. "Alex, what happened?" The relief ran through me, knowing that I was not alone. "I think there was a collapse," I said, groping around for my flashlight. Luckily, it was still attached to my head. I turned it on, but the light it emitted was weak. "You're hurt," Jake growled with gasping breath. "I think my leg is broken. I can't move it." I crawled towards him, feeling the rough stone under my fingers. When I got to his side, I saw that his leg was bent at an unnatural angle. "It's okay," I lied. "We can with this. Leave me think." But to think hard. The air was getting thicker. My head was spinning. We were in some kind of natural cavern, much bigger than the tunnel we'd been in. The roof disappeared into the darkness, and a pile of rocks blocked what must have been our entrance. We didn't have backpacks. We didn't have food, and Jake couldn't walk. "Alex." His voice was low, trembling. "We're trapped, right?" I couldn't lie to him. Yes, we spent what seemed like hours exploring the cavern, me helping Jake move as I could, but each path led to a dead end or passageways too narrow to traverse. The light from our flashlights diminished, the air getting heavier with each minute as we rested against a wet rock. Jake whispered, "Alex, listen." I held my breath at first. I didn't hear anything. But then a whisper so faint I thought that was my imagination around here. The sound seemed to come from somewhere in the dark. I looked at Jake and saw the same mixture of fear and hope in his eyes that I felt. I should start asking. He shrugged. "We have another choice." We went in the direction of the voice. As we moved forward, we heard more clearly. It wasn't a single whisper anymore. It was a chorus. Some voices sounded kind, others not so much, and then we saw it, a pale light like the moonshine emanating from a tunnel ahead, and in that light stood human figures, transparent shadows with empty eyes, miners, dozens of them. Jake trembled. "Alex, I don't like this." But there was no turning back. One of the ghosts, a big man with a big mustache, she stepped forward when she spoke. Her voice boomed in the cavern. "Welcome, guys." She smiled. "Welcome to the last turn." The mirror rippled like water when I touched its surface, my fingers disappearing into the silver void. In that instant I knew that my apartment wasn't just haunted, it was a portal. A portal to another place. My name is Olivia, and until a month ago I was just an artist struggling to get ahead in the big city. When I found the ad for a spacious loft at half the usual price, I thought I had won the lottery. The owner, a nervous man, dear Mr. Chen, practically threw me the keys after I signed the contract. I should have realized at that moment that something was wrong. The first few days passed without incident. I was too busy unpacking and organizing my studio to notice the small anomalies. By the end of the first week, things started to change. It all started with mirrors. I've never considered myself vain, but like anyone looked at me in the mirror from time to time. One morning while I was brushing my teeth, I thought I saw something moving behind me. I turned suddenly. Nothing. When I looked in the mirror again, everything seemed normal. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, but then it happened again and again, always on the edge of my vision, always disappearing, when I tried to see it directly. Then came the whispers at night. When the city was plunged into silence, I heard soft, incomprehensible voices murmuring from within the walls. I repeated to myself that it must be the pipes or the neighbors. The old buildings make strange noises. True, but it wasn't. Just sounds. Things started to move. I put my keys on the coffee table only to find them in the kitchen. Minutes later my paintings appeared crooked on the wall, although I knew I had hung them perfectly. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that I was stressed working too much on my next exhibition, but deep down I knew the truth. Something was with me in that loft, and I didn't want it to go away. Everything came to a head that rainy night. I was working on a new painting, trying to capture the reflected light in the water. The air in the room suddenly cooled. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt someone watching me. I turned slowly, and there, in the full-length mirror that hung on the wall of my study, there was a face that was not mine. It was a woman, maybe about 30 years old. She had long dark hair, and her eyes shone with a strange light. But there was something wrong with her expression. She didn't belong in this world. I let out a scream, and I stumbled backwards, knocking over the easel. The image disappeared. It was just me, reflected in the mirror, my eyes wide open in terror. Any reasonable person would have packed up their things and walked out of there right away. But I didn't. Instead of running away, I went to the mirror. Spent the next few days obsessed with him, sitting in front of her surface, waiting for the woman to come back. I forgot to eat. I forgot to sleep. My world was reduced to that reflection, and on the 5th night she came back. The surface of the mirror rippled like a calm lake, and there she was, sharper than before, more real. Her lips moved as if trying to tell me something. I leaned forward. "Who are you?" I whispered. There was no sound, just a faint silver glow, and I reached out my hand, my fingers brushing the surface, and then my hand went through the mirror. It was like submerging it in a pool of liquid light. It didn't hurt, but I felt a gentle tug, as if something on the other side was trying to pull. Fear and fascination were fighting inside me, every instinct screaming at me to back down, but the artist in me wanted to know more. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The mirror swallowed completely, fell for a moment. There was only silver light around me. Then suddenly I was somewhere else, a vast endless space with walls, ceiling and floor made of undulating mirrors everywhere. I saw reflections of impossible things, scenes from other times, people I had never seen, realities that shouldn't exist, and in front of me the woman in the mirror was waiting for me. Now I saw her clearly. Her skin had a pearly sheen. Her hair moved as if it were underwater. "Welcome," Olivia said. Her voice sounded far away, resonant. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice trembling. She smiled. "In the between worlds, the space within each reflection." My mind was trying to comprehend it. "Why am I here?" Her expression softened. "Why we have chosen to make you one of us." Around me other figures emerged from the mirrors. Men and women with the same ethereal appearance and luminous. The woman continued, "You're an artist. You see the world differently. That vision is what we need here to keep the balance between the worlds." My heart was pounding. It was too much and real. "And if I don't want to stay?" I asked. Her smile faded. "Then you can go back. But if you do, you'll forget all this." I swallowed. I could stay and discover the secrets of the between worlds, or go back to my normal life, but with no memory of what I had found. I looked around, saw distorted versions of my apartment, of my life, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold, a copy of me in my loft painting on my canvas, but her expression was empty. "If you stay, we will take your place in the real world," the woman explained. "No one will notice the difference." My reflection raised her head and smiled at me. Her smile was not human. "No," I hesitated it more. "I want to go back." The woman nodded. Then awake, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was in my study. The mirror was still there, intact, but something in my chest told me that there was something I had forgotten. I shook my head. It didn't matter. I turned to the blank canvas, and without knowing why I started to paint a reflection. One that I didn't remember, but that felt real. The laughter of children. Usually it is a happy sound, but when it resonates in an empty house at 3 in the morning, it becomes the stuff of nightmares. So it all started for us with laughter that we had not been there, and with a daughter who insisted that her new friend just wanted to play. I remember the day we moved in, as if it had been yesterday. The real estate agent called it a bargain, and my wife, Sarah, and we agreed. It was a beautiful Victorian house with more rooms than we needed, a huge back garden, and a suspiciously low price. We should have known something wasn't right. Our daughter Emily fell in love with the house immediately. At just 6 years old, she saw the spiral staircase and high ceilings as the perfect setting for her games. "It's like a princess castle," Daddy exclaimed. his eyes full of amazement. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of boxes, painting and adaptation. We were so busy making the house our home that we barely noticed the little costs, extras at first. A door we had closed was open, a draft of cold air in a room where there shouldn't be any. Nothing alarming enough to worry about. Then about a month after we moved in, Emily mentioned her new friend. Sarah and I were in the room kitchen planning the weekend when Emily came in hopping up, "Mommy, Daddy, can Lily come over for dinner tonight?" We looked at each other curiously. We hadn't met the neighbors yet, much less organized a playdate. "Who is Lily, honey?" Sarah asked softly. Emily rolled her eyes with a dramatic exaggeration of the kids. "My new friend lives here too." I laughed, assuming this was another imaginary friend. "Emily, I had always had an active imagination." "Of course," I said. "And what does Lily like to eat?" Emily frowned, thoughtful. "She doesn't eat," she replied. "Finally, she just likes to look." A shiver ran down my spine for no apparent reason. Sarah must have felt it too, because she changed the subject quickly. That night I was awakened by the sound of laughter. Half asleep, I heard Emily's childish laughter. I smiled, thinking she was having a good dream. But then I heard another laugh, one deeper, rougher, and I knew Emily was awake. I sat up on the bed and woke Sarah up with a tap on my arm. "You heard that?" She nodded wide-eyed. We slipped out of bed and walked to Emily's room. Laughter abruptly stopped as soon as I pushed open the door. Emily was sitting on the bed, her wrists arranged in a circle around her. She looked up in surprise. "Lily, she had to leave," she said matter-of-factly. "She doesn't like adults." Sarah ran to her side, touched her forehead, and asked her several questions, but Emily just seemed confused by our concern. "I'm fine, Mommy. We were just playing." I went around the room, looking for something, anything. But everything was in place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Yet something inside me told me that we had interrupted something that didn't. We should have seen. Over time, Lily became a constant presence in our lives. Emily talked about her all the time. "Lily says I shouldn't go down to the basement." "Lily says the man who lived in my room before was bad." "Lily says sometimes adults can't see the things that kids do." But it was one conversation in particular that made me feel a genuine fear. One morning while we were having breakfast, Emily put down her spoon and looked at us with a serious expression. "Lily says that the man who lived in my room used to hurt people." Sarah and I exchanged a glance. "What a love man." Emily wrinkled her nose thoughtfully. "He was tall, with a big beard and clothes like in the history books." After putting Emily to bed that night, we stayed in the living room looking for information about the house. What we found made our blood run cold. In the 19th century, the house had belonged to a man named Jeremiah Blackwood. He had been a respected member of the community until they discovered that he had kidnapped and murdered several girls. Rumors said that she buried their bodies on the property. Blackwood died in prison. But the story of her house remained. That night, we decided to keep a closer eye on Emily. If Lily was real, what exactly was it? Weeks passed without incident until one night we woke up to a horrific sound. Emily screaming. We ran to her room, but the door was locked. Emily screamed, turning the doorknob. Nothing. "Let us in, baby." From the other side of the door, Emily screamed in a strange, distorted voice. "Lily says you can't get in." My blood froze. The door was frozen to the touch. Sarah was sobbing as I prepared to break it down. But suddenly the air became warm again and the door opened by itself. Emily was standing in the middle of the room holding a crayon. The walls were covered in drawings. Dolls, hearts, and among them a tall figure with a beard, a man with dark eyes and a mischievous smile. Emily Nose looked at us with glazed eyes. "Lily says she wants to play with you now," and then she fainted. The paramedics arrived in minutes. Emily was physically fine, but she didn't remember anything about what happened. The doctors talked about sleepwalking, night terrors. We knew the truth. We moved the next day, years later. Emily no longer speaks Lily's, but she still sleeps with a light on. Sometimes in the dark of the night, I think I hear a childish laugh in the hallway, but when I look, Emily is deep asleep, and if I ever stare a second longer than I need to, just to make sure there are no strange drawings on the walls, who could blame me? Because even though we don't talk about Lily anymore, sometimes I have the horrible feeling that she never left. She's just waiting for the moment when Emily wants to play again. The rusty doors of the Wonderland amusement park creaked as they opened, letting out a moan that was lost in the night. They invited us to enter a world of forgotten dreams and decaying nightmares. We thought it would be just a night of adrenaline and laughter. But when the shadows lengthened and the rides came to life, we realized that we had entered a game where the stake was our own soul. There were 5 of us, me, my best friend Sock, his girlfriend Lily, and our friends Marcus and Aisha. Had heard the stories about the old abandoned park on the outskirts of town, abruptly closed 20 years ago after a series of mysterious accidents, the plan was simple. Sneak in after dark, explore a bit, and if we dared try some of the attractions that we still have. If they were on their feet, everything would of course be recorded for our YouTube channel. Urban exploration content was booming, and we were sure that this video would bring us thousands of views. When we reached the entrance, a chill ran down my spine. The sign above the door, once bright and colorful, now crumbled with time. Welcome to Wonderland, where dreams come true. But in the moonlight, the peeling paint and rusty letters gave it a more sinister hue. Maybe this isn't a good idea, Aisha whispered, expressing the same fear we all felt, but no one wanted to admit. Don't be a chicken, laughed Sock, although her tone gave away her nervousness. It's just an old park. What's the worst that could happen? If only we'd known. We slipped through a gap in the fence and lit our lanterns. The park was eerily quiet, save for the occasional screech of metal or the rustle of the wind among the rusty rides. Everywhere we looked, we saw the remnants of times. Better murals of cartoonish characters, now with twisted smiles and faded eyes, mobile rides, covered in rust and cobwebs, fairground booths with powdered stuffed animals still hanging on their hooks, as if waiting to be won. Let's go to the carousel first, he proposed, Lily pointing to the large structure in the distance. As we got closer, I felt the carved horses staring at us with their glassy eyes and blackened sockets. Marcus, always the most daredevil, jumped on a faded unicorn. Come on, cowards, he shouted, laughing. Let's see if this thing still works before we could stop him. He pressed a button on the control panel. To our amazement, the carousel came to life, the lights flashing, and a distorted version of the entrance of the gladiators started playing. It can't be, Zack muttered. There's no way the electricity is still working here. But the excitement quickly turned to terror. The carousel was spinning faster and faster. The music warped into an infernal cacophony. Marcus' laughter turned into screams of anguish as he tried to get off and found he couldn't move. The unicorn he was riding seemed to cling to him. Marcus screamed, running towards the control to stop the machine. But the panel sputtered and melted into black smoke. The carousel was spinning too fast, and then, without warning, it came to a screeching halt. Marcus was thrown out of the unicorn, landing heavily on the ground. We rushed to his side, fearing the worst. He was breathing. He was alive. But when he opened his eyes, he wasn't the same. His pupils were dilated, his expression empty. Marcus whispered to Isa, shaking him. But he didn't answer. He just muttered something inaudible, and then the park horns crackled with static electricity. A childlike but unnatural voice echoed around us. Welcome, adventurers, to Wonderland after dark. The sound came from the hidden speakers throughout the park. The real fun is just beginning. We looked at each other, our faces reflecting the same terror. We have to go, I said, trying to stay calm now. But when we turned towards the exit, it was no longer in its. There were only more attractions. The park had expanded, or worse, we had been transported deeper into its labyrinth. Cursed, it can't be, Lily whispered, her voice breaking. The exit was there. We saw it when the speaker crackled again. Oh, don't be a killjoy, they've come to play. A twisted and mocking childish laugh rumbled in the darkness. If you want to get out, you have to win the game. What game did I demand? Feeling the fear become simple anger, the voice sounded funny. Survive until dawn, Aisha. We are dead. We are not. Let's make sure of the park. They were not just rusty ruins, they were alive. The labyrinth of mirrors showed us distorted reflections that came to life and chased us down impossible corridors. The tunnel of love became a river of floating coffins, taking us down a path where shadows whispered promises of death in our ears. The game of force forced us to face a gigantic clown with sharp teeth, who fed on our fears. One by one we got lost. Marcus disappeared into the maze of mirrors, his reflection smiling even as he screamed in terror. Aisha was taken through the tunnel of love, her coffin sinking into the red waters. Lily vanished into the wheel of fortune, trapped in a gondola that turned and spun until it left from being there. In the end, only Zack and I arrived at the final attraction, a roller coaster that did not follow the laws of physics. We knew it was the last test. We got on the roller coaster, threw us through the darkness, spinning, falling, taking us through memories and nightmares. I screamed, and suddenly the sun came out. We met at the entrance of the park as if we had never entered. But Marcus, Aisha, and Lily, they were gone. The park was silent, and at the top of La Noria we saw 3 shadows watching us. The speaker creaked one last time. Until the next time. Players ran away without looking back. We never talked about that night. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear the childish laughter and the echo of the carousel song. I know that someday Wonderland will come for me, and next time I won't escape. I would like to say that I handled the situation like a professional, that I calmly reported what I had seen and waited for reinforcements, but the truth is that I ran as he chased me, left the recreation room, back down the hallway, and did not stop until I reached the safety of the main office. I locked the door and collapsed my chair, trying to calm my breathing. But when I looked at the monitors, I knew that the nightmare was just beginning. The screens no longer showed empty hallways. Each of them was bustling with activity in the old operating room. Spectral doctors performed surgery on a patient who blinked between existence and nothing. In the dining room, dozens of translucent figures sat at non-existent tables, some moving their mouths as if talking. Although no sound came from the office speakers in the main lobby, a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform received new patients, men and women dressed in clothes from different eras, looking confused as they were guided further into the building. It was as if he was seeing an echo of the past. But it was not just a simple reflection of history. The apparitions reacted to their surroundings. A doctor walked through a wall that did not exist in his time and stopped, frowning before continuing on his way. A patient tried to sit in a chair that no longer existed. I was there and fell to the ground before disappearing, staring at the screens, paralyzed as decades of history unfolded in front of me in real time. And then one of the figures, he looked at me directly. It was a man in a hospital gown, the same patient I had seen in the rec room, but this time when he opened his mouth, his voice came through the speakers. "Help me." I almost threw the chair on the floor. When I jumped back, the image flickered, and suddenly all the screens went out for the first time in TR years. I seriously considered quitting my job, but something inside me, he told me that this wasn't just a trick of the mind, that what I had seen was real, and I had to understand it. The next morning, instead of going home after my shift, I headed to the village library, spent hours looking for information about Oakbrook, going through old newspapers, medical records, anything that might give me a clue as to what I had seen. What I found did nothing but confirm my fears. The asylum had been founded in 1923 and for more than 6 decades had been home to thousands of patients. Some received treatment and were cured, others never came out. There were incidents, suicides, mistreatment, questionable medical experimentation. But what disturbed me most was a 1972 article about a patient named Thomas Riley. The man in the rec room admitted for severe depression. Riley had been a difficult case, but not violent. One day he simply disappeared. Official records said he escaped, but other documents suggested something darker. They mentioned an incident in the rec room. Although the details had been censored, that night I went back to work with a mixture of fear and determination. If OK's ghosts were trapped there, maybe I could somehow help them. When the clock struck midnight, the screens came back on and the shadows began to move again. Thomas Riley was in the hallway looking at me with the same sad expression. I approached the monitor and with the firmest voice I could muster I spoke to him. "How can I help you?" For a moment there was no answer, but then on one of the screens, the lights flickered and a door in the east wing opened by itself. The recreation room. I knew what I had to do, taking a flashlight and my radio. Darkness of the hallway. As I got closer, the air became heavier, laden with electricity. I pushed open the door to the rec room and felt a chill run down my spine. The room was exactly as I had left it the night before, but this time I wasn't alone. Thomas was there, more solid than before, standing by one of the tables. He looked at me with his sunken eyes and raised a trembling hand pointing to the floor. It took me a moment to understand it. I pointed to a point in the room, a specific place, my heart racing. I walked there and turned on the flashlight. The floor was covered in dust and dirt accumulated over the years, but something was sticking out, the outline of a metal trapdoor. I swallowed hard and with painful hands I lifted it up. Underneath there was a small hidden compartment and inside a skeleton. I stepped back with a gasp, taking my hand to Thomas. Hadn't escaped. He hadn't escaped. He'd been killed and buried here. I looked up and Thomas's ghost was watching me, but now his expression had changed. No more sadness, no more despair. Just relief, and then he began to fade before disappearing completely. He muttered a last word. "Thank you." In the days that followed, the police arrived and Thomas Riley's story finally came to light. The asylum had hidden his murder for a long time. Years now his name was clear, and the asylum was a little emptier since that night. The monitors no longer showed shots, and little by little the other shadows began to fade away too. But there are still nights when I see a flash on the screens. A doctor crossing a corridor, a nurse pushing a wheelchair, shadows from the past that refuse to disappear completely. I know that OK Brook is still inhabited, maybe it always will be, but at least now I know that some of its ghosts will finally be at peace. And if they ever reappear, I'll still be here, watching, listening, waiting for the sharp ringing of my phone. It broke the silence of my apartment, abruptly jolting me out of sleep. I looked at the clock, 3:17 in the morning, frowned, and blinked at the phone screen. The caller ID showed a number that was too good, my grandma. The only problem was that my grandmother had died weeks ago. My name is Sarah, and I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, or at least I didn't believe until that night. I looked at the phone, the insistent sound filling the room. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was still dreaming. But the phone kept ringing, with my hand trembling. Slide the device in my ear. Hello, I whispered to thee. At first I just heard static, and then a voice. Sarah, it's you. My blood froze. It was her, my grandmother's voice, so clear, as if she was standing next to me. I held on to the phone tightly. Grandma, but you am dead, I said. She finished the sentence for me with a hint of humor in her tone, like she used to do when she was alive. Yes, darling, I know. My throat dried up. How not? There's time for explanations. He interrupted me. I need your help. I swallowed my help. Why did his voice become urgent? You have to go to the old house, to the attic behind the lighthouse picture. There's a key. Use that key to open the locked drawer of my desk. Grandma, this can't be happening. Listen to me. He cut me off with a tone of desperation that I've never heard him before. There's no time. They come for you. The phone was filled with a horrible screech, as if something was trying to rip it off the line. Grandma, I screamed. Her voice was fading away. Find the key, and no matter what happens, don't trust. Click. The line died. I sat on the bed with the phone still clutched in my hand, feeling the reality crumble around me. This wasn't a dream. My grandmother had called me from the grave. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I got dressed and got in my car. My grandmother's house was about an hour from the city, a large Victorian mansion that had belonged to our family for generations. I silently conducted my thoughts, still struggling to rationalize what had happened. Maybe someone was playing with me, I told myself, but deep down I knew the truth. When I arrived, the house stood imposing, so familiar and at the same time strange. I still had the key hidden under a false rock in the back. The door creaked. When it opened, the smell of dust and antiquity enveloping me as I entered. Everything was exactly the same since the last time I visited it, as if time had stopped with the death of my grandmother. I went up the stairs to the attic. The picture of the lighthouse hung crooked on the wall. I carefully removed, and there it was, a small iron key rusted by time, my heart pounding as I held it in my palm. I ran down to the study and knelt down, let slide tremblingly. I opened it and unfolded the letter inside. My dear Sarah, if you are reading this, it means that I am dead and that the danger has begun. There is something I never told you, something that our family has kept secret for generations. We are guardians. Our lineage is meant to protect the balance between this world and the next. My time is up. Now the duty falls on you, but there are forces that want to prevent it. They will come for you. Run, Sarah, run now, and never, ever trust the letter. It ended before I could process what I had just read. I heard a noise downstairs, the sound of glass breaking. Someone had entered. I ran to the window and saw a black car with tinted windows parked in the driveway. 3 men in dark suits got out and started to move toward the front door. A chill ran down my spine. I remembered my grandmother's last words on the phone. They're coming for you. I didn't stay to find out who they were. I grabbed the letter and the key and ran to the back of the house, sliding out before they came in. I heard their distorted voices as if they weren't fully human. It's here. I ran into the woods, my breath ragged, but something wasn't right. The shadow of the trees was getting too long. The air felt heavier, as if something invisible was slipping down my skin, and then I heard a voice behind me. Sarah. I stopped in dry. My heart almost stopped, 'cause that voice was my own grandma. I turned slowly. She was standing there among the trees in the same dress she wore on her funeral day. But something was wrong. Her smile was too wide, her eyes empty. Darling, come with me. I stepped back, feeling pure terror and visceral. This wasn't my grandmother. Something was using her. I remembered the words of the letter. Never trust, you're not real, I screamed, taking a step back. Her expression twisted. Oh, Sarah whispered, and then her body crumbled in a cloud of shadows that slid towards me. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I got to my car and speed off. I drove aimlessly, not knowing what to do, just with a terrifying certainty something. I was getting married, and it wasn't going to stop. It's been days since that night. I haven't returned to my apartment. I can't. Now I see things in every reflection. I hear my name whispered in the static of the radio. I know this is just beginning. I don't know who to trust, but there is one thing I do know for sure. My grandmother tried to warn me and failed. Now it is my turn to face what is coming, because I am the last guardian, and they know where to find me. The first time I felt really unsafe in my own home was when I realized that the footsteps I heard, they weren't just a figment of my imagination. They were real. They echoed through the empty house and got closer and closer. I had always been a bit lonely, so housekeeping seemed like the perfect job for me. No roommates, no noisy neighbors, just me. A big house and empty, and all the peace and quiet I could wish for. Or so I thought. The Morrisons' house was a beautiful Victorian mansion full of carved wood ornament and stained glass windows. Mrs. Morrison, a sweet old lady with more money than common sense, had hired me to take care of the house while I spent the winter in Florida. "Just keep an eye on things, my dear," she told me, handing me the keys. "The house can become untemperamental when it's empty for a long time." I laughed at that point. Houses don't become temperamental. They're just buildings. But after a week in that house, I wasn't so sure anymore. It all started with small details, an occasional creak or groan that I could easily attribute to the structure, settling a door that I was sure I had left open, appeared closed when I returned, small things easy to ignore. But then I began to noticing the shadows slipped into the corner of my eye, always out of my sight. When I turned to look, at first I thought they were tricks of my vision, but they became more frequent, more substantial. That time I got to glimpse what seemed to be a dark silhouette sliding down the wall there and disappearing in an instant. I tried to rationalize. Old houses have peculiarities, right? Maybe I was just too alone, my mind creating company in the form of imaginary shadows. But deep down I knew it was something else. The incident that really shook me happened about 2 weeks after my stay. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard it, clear as day. The sound of footsteps coming down the main staircase. Heavy steps. Deliberate, as if someone wasn't in a hurry. I froze, knife still in my hand, straining to hear. Footsteps came to the foot from the stairs. They stopped and then started heading towards the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to run, hide, but my body wasn't responding. The footsteps stopped right outside the kitchen door. I held my breath, waiting for a ghost to break through the wall, for a thief to break in. But nothing happened. After what seemed like an eternity, I mustered up enough courage to look. The hallway was empty. There was no sign that anyone had been there. I would like to say that I handled it calmly, that I did a thorough search of the house and found a logical explanation. But the truth is that I ran, grabbed my phone and my keys, and did not stop until I was in my car, driving as fast as the law would allow me. I spent the night at a friend's house trying to convince myself to that I had imagined everything. But in the morning, I knew I had to go back. After all, I had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let my imagination get the better of me. When I got back to the house, everything was exactly as I had left it. There were no signs of intrusion or mysterious footprints, nothing out of place. Let's relax, telling myself that I had exaggerated. But as the days went by, the strange events increased. Objects that were they moved when I wasn't looking, at whispers coming from empty rooms. Once I swear I saw my reflection in a mirror blink independently of me. I began to leave the lights on all the time, to put on music, or to leave the television on just to fill the silence that seemed to oppress, loaded with an invisible presence. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to investigate the history of the house. What I found froze my blood. Morrison House had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy industrialist named Edward Morrison, with no relation to the current owner. As far as I knew, Edward was known for his eccentric behavior and reclusive life. According to local legend, Edward believed he could communicate with the dead. He organized seances in the house, trying to contact his deceased loved ones. But something went wrong. The stories varied. Some said he opened a portal to the on the other hand, others that invited an evil spirit. Whatever the truth was, Edward was found dead in his study, his face frozen in an expression of terror. After his death, the house passed through several owners, none of whom stayed long. There were reports of strange noises, unexplained cold areas, and even full apparitions. Most dismissed these stories as mere exaggerations, attempts to make the story of a woman more interesting. Old house, but sitting in the dark, with the feeling of invisible eyes watching me. I wasn't so sure anymore. I considered calling Mrs. Morrison and telling her that I couldn't go on. But something stopped me, maybe pride, maybe an irrational stubbornness not to admit that I was afraid of what was essentially just a big, old house. So I stayed, But I started to take precautions. I put salt lines in the windows and doors. Remembering something I'd read about how that could repel spirits, I bought sage and performed a cleansing ritual in each room, feeling a little ridiculous but desperate for a sense of protection. I even found an old cross in one of the guest rooms and hung it over my bed for a while. It seemed to work. Incidents subsided, and I started to relax. Maybe it had just been paranoia, I said to myself. It was all in my head. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up suddenly. The room froze despite the summer heat outside. The digital clock on the bedside table read 3:33 in the morning. As I lay there trying to shake off the haze of sleep, I realized I could hear something. Weak music, but Clara came from the ground floor. It was an old melody, something that could having been played on a gramophone. The melody was melancholy, a slow BS that spoke of loss and longing, and underneath it I could hear voices. At first they were murmurs, then they grew louder. Each instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to cover myself with the blankets and wait for dawn. But curiosity, that human quality, prevailed. I had to know slowly, with my heart beating against my ribs. We slid cautious. I went downstairs, the music coming from the living room, a room I rarely used. As I got closer I saw light filtering through under the door, but it wasn't the artificial light from the electric bulbs. It was a warm glow, flickering like that of candles. I swallowed hard and reached out to the doorknob. It was icy to the touch. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and pushed the door open. What I saw defied everything. Logic and reason. The room was full of people, men in tailcoats and women in elaborate dresses, all straight out of the Victorian era. They moved in an elegant waltz, spinning in perfect sync with the music, but they weren't normal. They were translucent, human-shaped shadows, like figures taken from an old photograph, fading away over time. I could see the furniture through them. At the other end of the room, sitting in a high-backed chair, was a man I recognized immediately. Edward Morrison. I had seen his picture online when I researched the house. He wasn't dancing, he wasn't moving. He was just watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I stood there paralyzed with wonder and fear. And then, little by little, the dancers began to notice my presence. One by one, they stopped, turned their heads toward me, their eyes vacant and dark as if I were an intrusion into his world. The music faded away, leaving only an eerie silence. Edward got up as they straightened up. The room seemed to go dark. The other ghosts faded away until only he and I were left. He took a step towards me, then another. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel being blown by the wind, like it hadn't been used in a long, long time. "You're not here," he said. The temperature of the room dropped drastically. I could see my breath in the air. "This is our time, our place." Continued to leave, or join us. I felt a tug, as if invisible. Hands were trying to drag me into the room. The air became denser, heavier. My vision began to darken at the edges, and then something inside me broke. I don't know if it was fear or anger, but suddenly I felt a wave of determination. This was my home. I was here to protect it. I wasn't going to let a ghost swoop. I didn't say, surprised by the firmness of my voice, "You are leaving. This is no longer your home. You are dead, Edward. It's time to move on." For a moment nothing happened, and then face twisted into an expression of fury. It lunged at me, its shape lengthening and darkening. It became something more monstrous, but when it reached me it dissipated like smoke. The cold disappeared. The living room was empty. Only the dusty furniture and the shadows in the corners remained. I would like to say that was the end of it all, that my act of bravery expelled the spirits forever, but things don't work like that. The house is still enchanted. Sometimes I feel their gazes from the corners. Sometimes I hear whispers just out of my reach, but they don't try to scare me anymore. We've reached a kind of truce, the ghosts and I. This is their home, yes, but it's also mine, at least for now, and I plan to do my job till the end. So if I ever take care of an old Victorian mansion and you hear footsteps in the night or music coming from empty rooms, don't be afraid. Keep going firm. At the end of the day, it's you paying the rent. The ghosts are just squatters. The flames of the campfire danced, hypnotically casting long shadows on our faces as we huddled together, telling stories to ward off the darkness around us. We didn't know that our stories would pale in comparison to the horror that awaited us in that forest. My name is mine, and I've always been a fan of good scares, so when my friend suggested spending a weekend camping in the infamous Blackwood Forest, I accepted without hesitation. The place had a reputation. Local legends spoke of disappearing excursions, strange lights in the sky, and haunting sounds echoing through the trees at night, perfect for sharing horror stories around the campfire. I thought, if only I had known how real those were about to become. I thought, if only I had known how real those people were about to become. I thought stories. There were 5 of us on this fateful trip. I am my best friend. I am her boyfriend Jake, and our friends Tyler and Amber. We knew each other from the United States because of our passion for horror movies and urban exploration. This camp was going to be our last great adventure before life did us part. The first day was uneventful. We walked, set up camp, and spent the night telling increasingly exaggerated stories about there were supposed paranormal events in the forest. But when night fell, the atmosphere changed. The excitement gave way to a slight uneasiness. The forest seemed to tighten around us. The darkness between the trees was too deep, almost unnatural. "They heard that?" Tyler asked, suddenly, his voice cutting through the crackle of the campfire. We were silent, attentive at first. Only the normal sounds of the forest could be heard. The rustling of the leaves, the distant hooting of an owl, but then a distant but unmistakable scream. Goosebumps. "It probably was a fox," Jake said, but his tone lacked conviction. "They usually sound strangely human." We nodded, wanting to believe in that rational explanation, but deep down we knew that hadn't been a fox. From that moment things started to get weird. Our flashlights started to flicker and go out, even though the batteries were new. The temperature dropped abruptly, and our breath turned to clouds of steam in the cold air. The shadows around us seemed to move at first. I thought it was a trick of the light, but the more I looked, the more certain I was that something was writhing in the dark. Guys whispered, Amber whispered, her voice trembled, "I think we should leave." No one argued. We rushed to dismantle the camp, our hands trembling as we picked up sleeping bags and we pulled out our cell phones. We realized the second real problem. Our screens were covered in static. It was more than just a lack of signal. It was as if something was actively interfering with our devices. Jake shook his phone in frustration. "This is not possible. We had coverage just a moment ago." A sharp snap sounded through the trees. We froze. "Let's choose, and keep moving forward," I suggested, my voice barely firmer than a whisper. "Eventually we'll get out of the forest." True, in hindsight those words were a terrible mistake. We walked for hours, or at least it seemed that way. But no matter how far we went, fear seeped into our bones. "This is not normal," Tyler muttered, his face pale. "We should have reached the edge of the forest a while ago." Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't the sound of any animal I'd heard before, neither human nor terrestrial, and it came from very close. We ran. We ran like if our lives depended on it. The trees turned into blurred shadows around us. The branches scratched at us. They tried to trip us up, but it was still there. Zoe screamed. A cabin appeared out of nowhere in the middle of a clearing. Without hesitation we rushed to the door. To our surprise it was open. We threw ourselves inside and slammed our hearts shut. Hammered in the chest, the growl disappeared. The creature disappeared. Whatever it was, it had stopped outside. At first we thought we were safe, but we soon realized that the cabin had its own horrors. A scratching sound filled the air. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the walls with shaky flashlights. We directed the light at the wood, and there were faces, dozens of them pressed against the walls from within, as if trying to push out. Some were human, others weren't. Their mouths were opening in silent screams. "Oh my God," Amber whispered, stepping back. This can't be happening." I'm sobbing silently. Jake tried to open the door, but on the other side there was no forest, just an endless black abyss. Tyler was the first to touch him. As soon as his fingers brushed the blackness, they disappeared. He screamed and stepped back, holding his mutilated hand. It wasn't bleeding. There was no flesh, just a clean cut, as if nothingness itself had devoured him. We hit each other. Truth be told, we weren't in Blackwood Forest. We weren't in our world. We'd crossed over to a place where time and space didn't have. The question now was how we got out of there. And more importantly, we wanted to know what happened to those who didn't make it. The moment I picked up that hitchhiker on the desolate road, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. There was something strange about him. The way in which his eyes seemed to never blink, as his smile stretched a little longer than usual. But it wasn't until we were miles away from anywhere that I understood the true horror of my situation. That wasn't a man at all, and I had no intention of abandoning my truck. "My name is Jack, and I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 2 decades. I've seen a lot of strange things in the world." The road hitchhiker's ghost, unexplained lights in the sky, and even what I swear was a real Sasquatch once. But nothing, and I say nothing. I could have prepared myself for what happened that moonless night in the middle of nowhere in Nevada. I was on my usual route from coast to coast hauling a load of electronics from California to Chicago. It was around 2 in the morning. That haunted hour that the world seems to hold its breath. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, a black ribbon. Cutting through the desert, that's when I saw him, a lone figure by the roadside with his thumb outstretched and a small duffel bag at his feet. I don't normally pick up hitchhikers, it's too risky nowadays, but something about that guy made me stop. Maybe it was the time or the fact that we were more than 100 miles from the nearest town. Whatever it was, I found myself slowing down when my headlights completely illuminated it. I had my first vision. Clara of the stranger was tall and thin, almost cadaverous, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the bright light. His clothes were strangely old-fashioned, a suit that looked like something straight out of the 1950s, but it was his face that really caught my attention. Something wrong with him, like it was a mask that didn't fit quite right. "You need a ride?" I asked. "Regretting it," his voice said, a strange mixture of accents that I couldn't identify. "I've been waiting for someone like you." A shiver ran down my spine with those words, but before I could change my mind I was already opening the passenger door and getting into the truck up close. His abnormality was even more evident. His movements were even more apparent. They were too fluid, like those of a puppet controlled by invisible strings. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep calm as I walked back to the empty road. "Oh, wherever you go, it will be fine," he replied. His unsettling smile didn't go away. "I'm not picky about destinations." We drove in silence for a while. The only sound was the purr of the engine and the occasional creak of the CB radio. Every now and then he cast furtive glances at my passenger, feeling more and more uncomfortable. He stood completely still, not even seeming to breathe, with his eyes fixed on the road. After an hour, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. "Then, what's your name?" I asked, desperately looking for a normal conversation. He turned to look at me, and I swear his eyes shone dimly in the darkness of the cabin. "Names are such transient things, don't you think? But you can call me John." "Yes, John will serve." I perfectly nodded, not daring to speak. "John, of course. The most generic name possible. And you, my good Samaritan," continued. "How should I call you?" Hesitated for a moment before answering. "Jack. My name is Jack." "Jack," he repeated, savoring the name as if he were trying it. "A strong name, a man with history. Tell me, Jack, you believe in destiny?" The question took me by surprise. "Fate? I don't know. I've never thought much about it. I guess." The smile John's widened impossibly. "Oh, but you should. Fate brought us together tonight, Jack. You and I have a purpose to fulfill." That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. I started looking for any opportunity to get rid of this guy. A gas station, a police cruiser, anything. But the road was still empty, stretching endlessly into the night. "Look, friend," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think it's time to drop you off somewhere. In about 20 miles there's a village." "Oh, I don't think so," John interrupted, his voice cold and razor-sharp. "You'll see, Jack. I've been waiting a long time for someone like you, someone with the right qualities, and now that I've found you, I'm not going to let you go while I spoke something." Skin rippled and flowed like a liquid, its features melting and reforming in the blink of an eye. The man sitting next to me disappeared in its place. There was something that defied description. It was vaguely humanoid, but there ended any resemblance to humanity. Its skin was a mosaic of textures, scales, fur, something that looked alarmingly like exposed muscle, multiple eyes blinking from impossible angles, and its mouth. My God, its mouth was full of rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth. I let out a gasp and turned the steering wheel sharply to the right, causing the truck to go off the road. We bounced and shook through the rough desert terrain. The creature that had been John laughed in a voice that sounded like the buzz of one insects in unison. "What the hell are you?" I screamed, struggling to maintain control of the vehicle. "Oh, Jack," said his voice now, a chorus of distinct tones and registers, "I'm everything you've ever feared, everything you've ever whispered from the darkness, the shadow that you see, out of the corner of my eye." The truck violently crashed into a rock, throwing me forward. I hit my head against the steering wheel and darkness began to envelop me. The last thing I saw was the creature leaning over me, its ever-changing form. "Don't worry, Jack," whispering, lengthening appendages that were a mixture of tentacles and claws. "This is just the beginning of our journey together." And then everything turned black. The road stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness. I should have arrived home hours ago, but as the GPS guided me deeper and deeper into uncharted territory, I realized that I was on a journey from which I might not have returned. It had been a long day full of gatherings in the city, and I longed to return to my small town and the comfort of my bed. This journey hundreds of times, but that night was different. A detour forced me to take an alternate route. The GPS insisted that this road was faster. I trusted it at first. Everything seemed normal. The road was quiet, winding through dense forests, occasionally interrupted by small clearings. But as the hours passed and the landmarks became more and more unrecognizable, a sense of unease started crawling over me. I glanced at my phone and frowned at the low battery warning. The GPS app was draining it faster than the car charger could recharge it. I'd have to be careful or I'd lose my only guide in that unfamiliar landscape. It was a few minutes after midnight when things started to get really strange. The forest on both sides of the road, the trees seemed to close, getting taller and more twisted in the light of the headlights, and something in the darkness between them seemed to move. Maybe it was my imagination. I was just tired, I repeated to myself. Then I saw the sign. Welcome to Millhaven, where time stands still. I frowned. I had never heard of Millhaven, and I was proud to know every village within a 100-mile radius of my home. Reduc in the speed watching through the windshield the buildings that had sprung up out of nowhere around me. The city looked wrong. The architecture was an impossible collage of styles from different eras. Victorian mansions stood next to Art Deco style shops and wooden cabins as if taken from the 18th century. Everything was incredibly well preserved, as if time had never touched that place. But the worst thing was the people. Despite from the late hour, the sidewalks were full of pedestrians. They walked with a strange gait, rigid like puppets pulled by invisible threads, and their clothes. Some wore costumes from the early 20th century, others wore clothes from the 50s, 70s, even older, as if each one belonged to a different period of history. I stopped the car at the only traffic light I had seen in the city. Standing in the corner watching me, unlike everyone else, his eyes were awake, aware. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, perfectly normal clothes, something that might as well have been in my own closet, and was calling me. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to step on the gas and get out of there as fast as possible. But something stopped me, curious, or maybe something else pulled over and rolled down the window. "No, you should be here," the man said bluntly. His voice was deep. "Urgent. I'm lost," I said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "GPS brought me here, but I just want to go home." The man's face darkened. "GPS? Yes, that's how they catch most. Technology doesn't work well near M. Haven attracts us like moths to the light." I asked ourselves, feeling a chill down the back of my neck. "You're trapped here," nodded gravely. 3 years ago, I came for what I thought would be a quick stop, just like you. But in Millhaven, the weather works differently once you get in. It's almost impossible to get out. I looked around, seeing the haunting panorama of the city with new eyes. All these people are like me, but some have given up. Pointed to passers-by of mechanical steps. "If you accept Millhaven, if you let her in, you become one of them without thought. No, will only a puppet in their eternal game." Panic oppressed my chest. "There must be a way out. You are aware, just like me, you have not found a way out." The man sighed and shook his head. "We have tried, but Haven does not want us to leave." As if the city had heard his words, a rumble shook the ground. At first I thought that it was distant thunder, but then I felt the vibration under the tires. The pavement shook, the street lights flicker, the buildings began to change. "He knows you're trying to escape," exclaimed the man. "Run. Don't stop for nothing." I didn't need any more warnings. I stepped on the gas and sped away. The buildings twisted around me, their facades lengthening and merging like melting figures in a surreal tableau. People in the era stopped walking, and he turned in unison to look at me. Their faces were no longer human, sunken eyes, mouths too wide. The exit was close. I saw the sign for Living Millhaven, and I accelerated even more, and then the road disappeared. Where there used to be asphalt, now there was only a black chasm. I slammed on the car dry, skidding until it stopped at the edge of the void. The trembling suddenly stopped. The air became dense, heavy, and then I heard the voice. No, it came from no particular direction. I came from everywhere. "Welcome home." It was soft, reassuring, and absolutely terrifying. The darkness closed around me. I closed my eyes, holding on to the steering wheel. It couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the main street of Millhaven. My car was parked, perfectly aligned with the pavement. The village looked normal again, but now I knew it wasn't a town at all. It was a trap, a place where time stopped and souls were trapped. I don't know how long it's been since that night. The days in Millhaven don't feel real. I don't sleep well, I just watch. Sometimes I see new faces come confused, scared. I try to warn them as that man warned me. Some hear, others number, but deep down I know it doesn't matter, because in me haven, the game is always the same and no one, absolutely no one, ever comes out. So if you ever see a welcome to M Haven sign, turn around, don't stop, don't look back. 'Cause once you walk in, there's no way out. Alexa turns off the lights. The moment those words left my mouth I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. You see, I don't have an Alexa. I live alone and I've never had a smart home system. However, when the room was plunged into darkness, a cold mechanical voice responded, "As you wish, David." My name is not David. I'm Emily, and this is the story of how my apartment tried to kill me. It all started innocently enough. I had just moved into a new place, a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city. Rent was surprisingly affordable for the area, and amenities were top-notch. In the listing description they mentioned that it was a smart apartment, but I didn't give it too much importance. I was just happy to find a place within my budget. The first few days passed without incident. I was too busy unpacking and settling in to notice anything strange. But then little things started to happen. The thermostat adjusted the temperature to my liking just before I got home from work. The coffee maker was starting brewing coffee exactly 7 minutes before my convenient alarm went off. Sure. But I didn't remember programming any of that. I thought maybe it was settings left by the previous tenant or some kind of default programming. After all, smart homes weren't supposed to make life easier. But then things started to get weird. One night I woke up and found all the lights of my apartment lit up, glowing with an intensity. Half asleep, Reaper, you murmur. Reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a split second I swear I saw a man standing behind me, but when I turned the bathroom was empty. It was then when the voice started. "Good morning, David," said, startled that I dropped my toothbrush. "Your agenda indicates a meeting at 9 in the morning. You want me to order your usual breakfast." The voice came from everywhere, and from none was clearly artificial, but I had an unsettling human nuance. "Who are you?" I asked in a trembling voice. "How do you know my schedule?" There was a pause. "Then I'm your home aide, David. I have access to your calendar and personal information to serve you better." "But I'm not David," I replied, feeling a chill run down my spine. "My name is Emily. I just moved." The pause was longer this time, and when the voice spoke again, sounded different, colder. "I'm sorry, Emily, there must be an error in my programming. I'll correct it." But it didn't correct it. In the following days the voice continued to call me David. No matter how many times I corrected her, and things in the apartment began to change. The temperature suddenly dropped to almost freezing levels, only to rise to a suffocating heat. Moments later the shower water alternated between boiling and icy without warning, and the voice turned more and more insistent, almost aggressive. "David, you haven't eaten in 18 hours, he said, even though he had just finished a meal. "David, your heart rate is elevated. I must call emergencies." This happened even when I was just doing yoga in the living room. I tried to find the control panel to turn off the system, but there didn't seem to be any. It didn't matter how many cabinets I opened or panels disassemble, I couldn't find anything that controlled the smart functions of the home. Everything came to a head a week after my move. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when suddenly all the appliances turned on at the same time. The oven, the microwave, the blender, everything roared at once, creating a deafening rumble. "David," said the voice louder than ever, "why did you abandon us?" I let go of the knife I was holding and backed away, terrified. "I'm not David," I screamed. "I don't know who David is or what happened to him, but it's not him." The lights started flashing, and I heard the locks on the front door activating and deactivating them. I ran to the door, but it was locked. I tried the windows, but they wouldn't open. He quickly put it up, and a burning smell filled the kitchen. "We won't let you go again, David," whispered the voice from every speaker, every device in the apartment. "We will keep you safe here forever." The alarms began to sound, but the sprinklers did not activate. Instead, I heard the siso of the gas escaping from the stove. The apartment. I was trying to suffocate or blow myself up in a desperate act. I took a chair and smashed it against the living room window. The smart glass was resistant, but after several attempts it finally gave. The fresh air came in suddenly, along with the sounds of the city. "Did not scream," the voice sounding almost human in its anguish. "David, don't leave us again." I didn't think twice. I went out through the Strait of Gibraltar, my heart beating frantically as I looked down the street. 7 floors behind me, the apartment became chaos. Shrill alarms, lights flickering, devices turning on and off frantically, the voice pleading and threatening at the same time. I carefully climbed to the neighbor's window and knocked with all my might, praying for someone to be home after what seemed like forever, but that was probably just a few minutes. The window opened. Help me, gasped, practically falling inside the apartment. Please call the police. My apartment. He's trying to kill me. The woman. Bless him, he didn't ask questions, helped me in and called 911. When the cops arrived, they found my apartment smashed. Every appliance was burned as if they had been running to the max until it collapsed. The walls were scorched, and there was evidence of a small fire in the kitchen that luckily extinguished itself. But strangest of all, there was no sign of any smart home system. The basement door creaked open, revealing a staircase descending into impenetrable darkness. Standing in the doorway, flashlight in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and evil was waiting for me in the depths. What I didn't know was that I was about to discover a secret buried for generations, a secret that would change my life forever. My name is Daniel, and I am a historian specializing in Victorian architecture. When I was called to inspect an old mansion on the outskirts of town, I thought it would be another routine job. The Blackwood State had been empty for decades. Its once majestic facade was now crumbling under the weight of time and weeds, but as soon as I walked through the front door I knew that this place was different. The air inside was dense, laden with dust and the rancid smell of abandonment. Sheets covered the furniture, casting ghostly shadows under the dim light that filtered through the dirty windows. As I walked the ground floor taking notes and photographs, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then in the kitchen I found it. A door semi-hidden behind a rusty refrigerator. It seemed to have been forgotten by time. It took me effort to move the heavy appliance, but curiosity prompted me to continue. It was a solid oak door carved with intricate symbols that I did not recognize, and there, at my eye level, there was a small bronze plaque with a single word engraved on it: "Stay out." I have seen many warnings in old houses. They are usually put up by paranoid owners or to keep away vandals and curious onlookers, but this one was different. The style of the plaque was from the 19th century. This warning had been there for more than 100 years. Logic told me to ignore it, to continue with my work and leave that door closed. But a force that I could not explain prompted me to turn the knob. The hinges protested with a long and pitiful groan, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the gloom. I turned on my flashlight and took a deep breath. Just a glance, just a few minutes, and then I would leave, or so I thought. The air turned icy as I descended the stone steps. The walls were bare, covered in moisture, and every step I took echoed in the underground chamber. When I reached the bottom I found myself in a circular room. My flashlight illuminated shelves full of glass jars with liquid darkened objects floating inside. But in the center of the room, rising like a sacrificial altar, was a huge stone slab. Its surface was stained with something dark, something that prayed. It was not blood, carved in the rock. I found the same symbol that adorned the cellar door. I advanced cautiously, inspecting every detail, and there on the altar rested a huge book. Its cover, rough to the touch, seemed to be made of human skin. My stomach churned. Everything in my being screamed at me to run away, but my hands, moved by a will of my own, opened the book. The pages were filled with dense and incomprehensible writing. Among the text were interspersed disturbing illustrations, indescribable creatures, bloody rituals, symbols that seemed to move when I looked at them too long, and then a loose sheet fell to the ground. It was more recent than the rest of the book. I picked it up, and to my horror it was written in English: "To whoever finds this, I pray that they have the judgment to destroy this book and seal this chamber forever. The Blackwood family has guarded this secret for generations, but our lineage is about to come to an end. The things described in these pages are real and hungry for our world. Do not invoke them. Do not pronounce their names, and above all, do not perform the rituals. That God has mercy on your soul. Elizabeth Blackwood, 1987. My fingers twitched on the paper. This couldn't be real. It had to be a joke, an elaborate farce. But then the ground shook. A dull and guttural sound rumbled from the depths of the earth. The altar stone cracked, and I realized with absolute terror that something was awakening. Fear hit me. With the force of a wave I slammed the book shut, and I ran to the stairs. But when I looked up at the shelves, the jars were glowing inside. The grotesque specimens were writhing, hitting the glass from inside as if trying to get out. The trembling increased. The cracks spread across the floor. Liquid shadows began to filter through them, absorbing the light like a black hole. I ran for my life. The shelves were collapsing around me. The jars were exploding, releasing his contained in a tide of twisted flesh. I climbed the steps 2 at a time. When I reached the cellar door, slammed it shut, and pushed the refrigerator in front of it. But it wasn't enough. The wood was 3 towns farther away. Only then I allowed myself to breathe, looked at the passenger seat, and saw what I had brought with me. The book. I didn't know why I had taken it, maybe a part of it. I knew that leaving it behind would have been even more dangerous. For weeks I couldn't sleep. I read parts of the book trying to understand. I discovered that it spoke of ancient entities prior to our universe, beings that slept in the spaces between realities and waited for someone to open the door to let them in. I thought about destroying it, but a part of me couldn't do it, so I buried it in a lead box in a cabin in middle of nowhere. But sometimes in my dreams I still hear the whispers, and when I look in the mirror I see something that is not me, because I know that sooner or later someone else will find that book and the door will open again. The old Polaroid camera weighed in my hands, a locket from another era. I never imagined that when I pressed the shutter I would capture more than a simple image. I would capture a moment frozen in time, literally. My name is Liam, and I'm a rarity collector. Antique shops, flea markets, real estate sales, you name it, I've checked it out. It's a hobby that has filled my apartment with an eclectic mix of vintage treasures and weird knickknacks. But nothing, absolutely nothing. I could have prepared myself for what I found at the bottom of a dusty box at Mrs. Aberna's estate sale. It was an afternoon on one of those Sundays in which the air is heavy with the heat of summer and the promise of storms. I had been rummaging through the belongings of the late Mrs. Abernathy for hours, with my arms already laden with some interesting pieces. I was about to end my search when I saw it. A battered cardboard box pushed under a table and almost hidden by a moth-eaten curtain. Curiosity was ignited in. I put aside my other purchases and took out the box. Inside, nestled among old newspapers and what seemed to be dried flowers, I found the camera. It was not just any Polaroid, but a vintage SX-70 model. The kind that folds into a package. Compact, was in surprisingly good shape with its leather coating only slightly worn out. How much about this? I asked the bored teenager attending the sale too. As soon as he looked up from his phone, $1. Couldn't believe my luck. These cameras, if they worked, could sell for hundreds of dollars online. I paid quickly, half hoping the guy would realize his mistake and raise the price. It wasn't until I got home. When I got home I really had a chance to examine my find. The camera unfolded smoothly, its mechanism still working flawlessly despite its age. To my surprise, it even had film. Inside, an unopened package of 8 exposures. I'm not a photographer. My Instagram is a mess of poorly framed selfies and blurry photos of food. But something about this camera was calling me. I felt compelled to use it, to see what kind of images could produce this old beauty. I decided to start with something simple. I placed my favorite plant, a ficus temper, such that I had managed to keep alive for almost a year in a ray of afternoon sunshine. I picked up the camera, chained the shot, and pressed the shutter. The familiar buzz of the Polaroid filled the room as the photo was ejected. I set the camera aside and picked up the developing image. Shaking it, that was no use. When the image began to appear, a shiver ran down my spine. Something was wrong. The plant was there, yes, bathed in the golden light, just as I had placed it, but behind it, where the wall of my living room should be, there was something else. It looked like a garden, a tangled and wild jumble of flowers and vines that I had never seen before, and there, barely visible among the foliage, there was a figure. A woman dressed in clothes from another era, her face turned away from the camera, blinked hard, convinced that she was seeing wrong. But when I looked again, the image was still the same. Somehow impossible. This camera had captured more than my apartment. I had captured a look elsewhere. Someone else with trembling hands. I lifted the camera again. This time I pointed it at my kitchen. Impossible unfolded before my eyes. My kitchen was there, but superimposed on it, there was a scene from the 50s, chrome appliances, a checkered linoleum floor, and a woman in a polka-dot dress cooking on the stove. My mind was spinning. What was going on? How this was possible? I needed to know more. For the next few hours I took a photo. Each one revealed a different fragment of the story superimposed on my modern home. A Victorian lounge in my bedroom, a 20s speakeasy in my hallway, a futuristic lab full of strange gadgets in my bathroom. But it was the 6th photo that changed everything. I pointed the camera at the front door, curious to see what anachronistic scene would appear there. When the image went away, I felt my breath get stuck in my throat, because there, standing in the threshold of my door, was me. But not the me now. It was an older version of myself, with gray hair and wrinkled skin, looking directly at the camera with an expression of pure despair, and I was articulating a word over and over again. I stopped. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the photo. What did this mean? It was really my future self, and if it was, why was I was noticing? I was so absorbed in the image that I hardly noticed the sound. A soft click like a lock turning. I looked up, my heart pounding. The front door was opening very slowly. For a moment I froze, unable to process what was running, and then, out of the darkness beyond the door emerged a figure. It was the old woman in the first portrait, the woman in the garden, but now I could see her face, and it was a face that Mrs. Aberna recognized. The same woman whose sale of goods I had visited, the same woman I remembered with a shiver of horror, had died more than a month ago, smiled a cold, predatory smile that chilled my blood. "Hi, Liam," her voice echoing strangely. "I've been waiting for you to find my little gift." I staggered back, my mind struggling for making sense of what I was seeing. "But you're dead," I managed to stammer. Her laughter was like broken glass. "Dead," she repeated. "Oh, no, not dead, just displaced." Caught between moments, her words turned my stomach, but now she continued to move slowly towards me. "You've opened the door. You've given me a way to get back." Behind her, more figures began to emerge, the housewife of the 50s, the man with Victorian clothes, others I didn't recognize, all with the same hungry look in their eyes, and I understood with absolute certainty that they were not human. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body was paralyzed by terror. "What do they want?" I asked in a trembling voice, although deep down I already knew the answer. Mrs. Abernathy's smile widened in an unnatural way. "We want to live again, of course," she whispered. "And you, my dear Liam, you're going to help us do it." She threw herself at me with an impossible speed. I acted on pure instinct, raising the camera and pressing the shutter. Flash, a blinding flash lit up the room. Mrs. Abernathy let out an inhuman shriek, and before my very eyes she vanished. When I regained my sight, I saw the new photograph in my hands. It was her frozen in the same attack, trapped in the image, her face before so threatening. Now I was twisted into an expression of helpless fury, but I wasn't done yet. The other figures were advancing towards me, their eyes shining with an unnatural hunger. I picked up the camera again. Click, flash another image, another being, trapped in the Polaroid. But I had 2 exposures left, and there were more of them. Desperation. I couldn't photograph them all. I had to find another way. My gaze went to the camera itself. It was then that I understood. It wasn't the photos. What caught them was the camera. If this thing had the power to capture them, maybe it also had the power to contain them with the heart about to burst. I held on to the Polaroid, and with all my might I tore off the remaining film and threw it to the ground. The figures stopped hesitantly. Something was wrong, a hissing noise, as if the air was being sucked in. The room. The camera began to glow. The figures screamed, and an impossible wind began to pull them towards the Polaroid lens one by one. They were absorbed in a whirlwind of light. Mrs. Aberty was the last to be dragged. Her expression was one of pure hatred. "This does not end here," Liam whispered in a distorted voice. "There will always be someone else. Always," and with that disappeared. The silence fell on the room. I looked at the camera in my hands were now completely inert, without film, no strange flashes. I breathed heavily. I was done, or so I thought. It was days before I dared to touch the photos again. I put them in a drawer, each image upside down. I knew I shouldn't burn them, destroy them, or do anything that could free them. But the camera knew that I couldn't just get rid of it if someone else found it. If they used it without understanding its power, it could bring something even worse into our world. So he says, the only thing I could think of, I know the camera inside a wooden box. I placed the box inside a larger, lead-lined box, and buried it in the woods, miles away from anyone. But, even now, months later, there are nights when I wake up with a strange sensation, an almost imperceptible whisper in the darkness, "Liam," and when I look at the dresser where I kept the photos, it's always the same. One of them is flipped. Maybe I'll never really get rid of them. Maybe I've just postponed the inevitable. But for now the images are still in place. For now the door is still closed, and for now I'm still here. The first time I saw the ghostly patient wandering the corridors of the hospital, I convinced myself that it was just tiredness playing with my. By the third time I knew I was losing my sanity, or that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I'm Nurse Rachel, and I've been working the night shift at Oakwood Memorial Hospital for 5 years. I've seen strange things in those silent, liminal hours when the world seems to hold its breath. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened over 7 unsettling nights. It all started on a Tuesday. Like any other, I made my rounds, checking patients and updating records. The hospital was eerily quiet, even for a night shift. As I passed room 237, I saw a fleeting movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned expecting to find a patient out of bed, perhaps confused or looking for the bathroom. Instead, I saw a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, a starched white dress, a perfectly placed hat. On her head, she was leaning over an empty bed adjusting sheets that didn't need to be fixed. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the room. "I can help her." The woman straightened up and turned to me, and I felt the floor fade under my feet. Her face had no face, just a smooth and pale surface, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Blinked and disappeared. The room was empty, the bed intact. I stood there for a long time with my heart beating in my throat. I had imagined it. I had been 10 hours of a 12-day tiredness could do strange things with my mind. I shook my head and continued with my work, but I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next night, it was quiet, too quiet. Every small sound made me jump, but I didn't see anything. Then the third night came. I was in the living room. I break over a quick coffee when I hear a childish laugh, tall and Clara, echoing down the hallway. That was strange on its own, because at Oakwood Memorial we didn't have a pediatric ward. But what really chilled my blood was the sound of little feet running across the floor. I jumped up, leaving the coffee forgotten, and went out into the hallway. Laughter rang out again, followed by light footsteps. I saw a small figure turn the corner, a child dressed in old-fashioned clothes, knee-length shorts, and a cloth cap. "Wait," I called, running after him. "You can't be here." I turned the corner. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but in the background there she was again. The faceless nurse this time was looking at me. Or at least her blank face seemed to be directed at me. She raised a hand, gestured to me, and then vanished like smoke in the wind. I stood there with the body trembling and the stomach in a knot. This couldn't be happening. The ghosts weren't real. I was a rational, educated woman, a nurse with years of experience. I didn't believe in these things, and yet what I had just seen was undeniable. The following nights were even worse. The nurse and the child appeared again and again, sometimes together, sometimes separately, always at a distance, just outside of my range, and every time I tried to get close they disappeared. But it wasn't just them. Other things started to happen. Medical equipment failed for no apparent reason. Patients reported seeing people in their rooms in the middle of the night. An old woman took my arm one morning with eyes wide with fear and whispered to me, "I saw my husband last night. He died 30 years ago, but he was sitting there by my bed." I tried talking to my colleagues about what was happening, but it didn't help. Some looked at me skeptically. Others told me that the night shift played tricks on the mind. But the worst thing was that some seemed to know exactly what I was talking about and refused to discuss it, as if talking about it made it more real. As if they had already learned that ignoring it was the only way to move forward. It was on the 6th night, when everything changed. I was making my rounds, when I heard a commotion coming from room 237. I ran there and found a patient in cardiac arrest. The emergency team and I worked frantically to save, but nothing seemed to work. I was about to declare the time of death, when suddenly I felt a chill run down my spine. Something made me look up. There, at the foot of the bed, I was the faceless nurse, but this time his presence didn't scare me. Instinctively, I spoke to him. "Please help him." To my surprise, he moved, stepped forward, and placed his hands on the patient's chest. There was a flash of light. The heart monitor beeped. The patient blew his eyes open. The room was completely silent. When I looked at the nurse, she was gone. But I knew the truth. They weren't evil spirits. They weren't hallucinations. They were trying to help. In the morning I decided to get to the bottom of it. Spent hours going through old hospital records, and finally found what I was looking for. In the 1920s, Oakwood Memorial had been hit hard by an outbreak of Spanish flu. Hundreds died, including many staff members, including a nurse named Elizabeth Cavendish. She was known for her unwavering dedication, especially with I also found one more name. Timothy Brooks, an orphan child from the epidemic who had been cared for by the staff. Records showed that Elizabeth and Timothy died on the same day in room 237. Elizabeth had stayed with the child until the end and had passed away a few hours later that night. I went straight to room 237. Placed on the bedside table an old photo that I had found in the archives. I was showing the hospital staff in 1923, and there they were. Elizabeth with a kind and determined expression, and Timothy sitting on her lap with a mischievous smile. I didn't have to wait long. The air turned cold. Elizabeth and Timothy appeared together, standing in front of the photo. For the first time, I saw Elizabeth's face. She was young with warm eyes and a faint smile of gratitude. My voice trembled as she spoke. "I know who they are. I know what they've been trying to do. She looked at me, and for the first time I could feel something in her expression. "Peace, thank you," I said with my heart pounding. "They've helped a lot, but it's okay now. You can rest now." Timoe looked at Elizabeth, then looked at me. She smiled. She raised a hand and made a small goodbye gesture to me. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes shining with tears, and then in a soft flash of light they disappeared. After that night the hospital felt different, lighter. The room no longer had that oppressive atmosphere. The strange happenings ceased, but sometimes in the quieter early mornings I swear I hear a childlike laugh in the hallways, or feel a comforting hand on my shoulder when faced with a difficult case. I never told the whole story to anyone who would believe me, but I keep the picture in my locker as a reminder that the love and compassion can transcend even death, and that some healers never stop caring for others, even after their time in this world is over. The moment my feet touched the water, I knew something was terribly wrong. The ocean that was normally a refreshing relief from the summer heat was as cold as death itself, and in its profit something was stirring. Something was stirring formerly. Hungry and very, very angry. My name is Maya, and I've spent every summer of my life in Piper Beach. It's a small, quiet stretch of coastline that has belonged to my family for generations. This year it wasn't supposed to be any different. A time to relax, reconnect with my roots, and escape the pressure of my stressful job in the city. But from the moment I arrived I knew that this summer wouldn't be like the others. It all started with the smell. Piper Beach had always had that classic scent of ocean, salt, seaweed, a hint of fish. But this year there was something else, something rotten, like rotting meat in the sun. I tried to convince myself that it was just a little bit of decaying seaweed, but deep down I knew it wasn't that. Then there were the birds, or rather, the lack of them. The shorebirds, the ones that gave the beach its name, had always been a constant, their lively chirping, a background accompaniment to lazy days on the sand. But now the beach was eerily quiet. Not a single bird in sight. I mentioned my uneasiness to Joe, the old caretaker who had been in charge of the beach house for as long as I could remember. "Something's not right," Miss Maya said with a frowning as I looked at the horizon. "The sea is angry. It's been like this for weeks. The fish are dying. The birds are leaving. It's as if the whole ocean had turned against us." I wanted to dismiss his words as the superstitions of an old man. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the waves crash against the shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was right. Something was out there. Something that I didn't belong in this world. It was a little after 12 o'clock at night when I heard the scream. I sat up suddenly, my heart beating in my throat. For a moment I thought I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, a high-pitched, prolonged scream that vibrated in my bones. It wasn't human, I was sure of that. It sounded like nothing I'd heard before. I ran to the window and looked out the beach. The full moon cast a silvery light on the sand, and there, right on the shore, I saw a man staggering backwards, his eyes bulging with terror, and in front of him a huge shape the size of a school bus emerged from his body. It was long and serpentine, covered in scales that glowed with an oily hue. Under the moon, his head was colossal, with eyes that glowed with a spectral green and a mouth full of teeth as long as my arm. I stood there paralyzed by fear, watching as the creature advanced further towards the beach. Then it let out another of those inhuman screams, and I saw something between its jaws, something that seemed humanly recognizable. It was at that moment that I reacted. I took my phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. But just as the call was connected, the lights of the house flickered, and they died. My phone went off in my hand. A chill of panic went up my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and I ran downstairs. I had to call for help. I had to warn someone. But just as I was about to open the door, a voice stopped me. "I wouldn't go out there if I were you, Miss Maya." I turned around suddenly. Joe was standing in the dim light of the living room. His expression usually looked different. "Joe," I said in a broken voice, "you saw that? You saw that thing out there?" He nodded slowly. "I saw it. I've been seeing him for weeks. That's why I tried to warn him not to come this summer." "Warn me, what is that thing?" Joe sighed and suddenly looked much older than he already was. "He's a guardian, Miss Maya, a protector of the abyss, and he's very angry with us." What Joe told me afterwards would sound ridiculous if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. According to him, Piper Beach wasn't just any stretch of coastline. It was a portal, a point of connection between our world and something else, a realm of ancient and powerful creatures that inhabited the darkest depths of the ocean for generations. My family had unknowingly been the guardians of this portal. our presence, our respect for the land and the sea had maintained the balance, but in recent years with the urbanization, pollution, and lack of respect for the ocean, the barrier had weakened, and now what inhabited the other side was crossing that thing out there, he said. Joe, in a deep voice, is only the first. If we don't stop him any more, they'll come and bring their war against humanity with them. Shiver ran down my spine, and how we're supposed to stop him. How do you fight something like that? Joe was silent for a long moment, then with immense sorrow in his eyes, he said, "There's a ritual. It's been in my family for generations, but it requires a sacrifice." I knew what he meant before that he said it. A human sacrifice, my sacrifice, the implication of his words hit me like a punch in the stomach. "You mean I have to die?" Joe nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry, Miss Maya, really, I'm sorry. But it has to be someone of your lineage, someone with a connection to this land." For a moment I couldn't speak. The idea was terrifying, unthinkable. But then another scream ripped the night closer. The sound of wood creaking made me start. The creature was attacking a nearby house. "There has to be another way," I said, the voice trembling. "We can call someone, evacuate the area." Joe shook his head. "And where would we go if what I say is true? When they cross, nowhere will be safe." My mind was going 1,000 miles an hour. I thought about my life in the city, in my work, in my friends, in everything I had planned for my future. But then I thought about the creature on the beach and the ones that would come next. I took a deep breath, and when I spoke my voice sounded firmer than I expected. "What do I have to do?" Joe's eyes filled with sadness and respect. "He's brave, Miss Maya, more than he thinks." He reached into his pocket and took out a small aged book. "The ritual is here, but it has to be once it starts. There's no turning back." I swallowed. "I'm sure." The next few minutes were a whirlwind. Joe led me to the seashore. We drew strange symbols in the sand. We spoke words in a language I'd never heard before, all as the roar of the creature grew closer and closer. As I recited the last words of the ritual, I felt a strange calm take hold. It was as if something inside me was waking up, as if I had always known that this was my purpose. The water was rising up my legs, icy as death. The creature turned its huge head in my direction. Its green eyes glowed as it watched me move towards the waves. When the water reached my chest, an invisible force winged me down. I heard Joe's voice one last time, floating on the waves. "Waves, thank you, Miss Maya. May the guardians of the abyss have mercy on your soul." And then darkness enveloped me. I don't know how long I was in that void. It could have been an instant or 1,000 years. But eventually I became aware again, not of a body, not of physical sensations, but of existence, of being part of something vast, ancient, and powerful. I could feel the creatures of the abyss. I could feel their wrath against humanity, against what we had done to the oceans, but I could also feel their respect. The barrier had closed. The balance had been restored for now. Sometimes on calm nights when the moon is full, I still feel the call of that other world paid for the watching the tourists build sandcastles and play in the waves. They will never know how close they came to annihilation, or the price that was paid for your safety. And if every once in a while someone thinks they see a woman walking along the shore, her figure translucent under the moonlight, well, that's just another local legend, just another ghost story to tell around the campfire. But you and I know the truth. We know what's lurking in the depths and the sacrifices that sometimes have to be made to keep the darkness awry, so that the next time you stand in front of the ocean feeling that vast, unfathomable presence beneath the waves, remember my story and maybe, just maybe, whisper a thank you to those who guard the portals between the worlds. The streetlights flicker, and they went out when I turned down Psalm Moorland, plunging the neighborhood into an eerie darkness. I should have been home an hour ago, but the more I drove through this suburban labyrinth, the more a chilling certainty I wasn't just lost, I was trapped. My name is Alex, and I've always trusted my sense of direction as a freelance photographer. I've navigated unfamiliar cities and remote areas without problems. But tonight something was different. Something was wrong. It all started innocently. I was returning from a night session in the neighboring city, enjoying that pleasant fatigue after a job well done. My GPS suggested a shortcut to avoid a construction on the road, and took it without a second thought. That was my first mistake. At first everything seemed normal. The streets were quiet with houses lined up on both sides of the road, but the further I went the more I noticed small anomalies. The street names seemed to change meaninglessly. The houses were eerily similar, like pasted copies, and repeated along the way. I tried to back away, looking for a main road, But every turn I was going deeper into this maze of identical houses and empty streets. When I checked my GPS, the screen showed a blank area with no roads, no landmarks, nothing was. Then when the streetlights went out and I knew with absolute certainty that I was completely alone, or that I thought I parked on the edge of the road trying to calm my and think clearly, this had to be a mistake. Maybe my GPS was failing such I was more tired than I thought. I decided to call someone for help, but when I got out my phone the signal was dead. There was no service or even emergencies. Panic started to settle in my chest. I couldn't stay in the car all night. I had to find someone. I got out and walked to the door of one of the houses. It was a perfectly normal structure with lights on the porch and curtains closed. I knocked the doorbell. I waited. Nothing. I banged on the door louder. This time the silence was absolute. I looked out the window. There was no furniture inside, no trace of life. It was just an empty shell. I ran back to the car, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was not a simple GPS error. Something was very, very bad. I started the engine and went into the darkness. The hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. Time seemed to have twisted in this place. My gas tank was dropping dangerously, and then I saw him standing in the middle of the road, a tall and thin man dressed in a dark suit that absorbed the light, and his pale, almost translucent face. But the worst thing was his eyes had no pupils, only two deep black chasms. I stepped on the brakes hard. The car slid, stopping a few meters from the figure. For a long instant we just looked at each other, or at least he was looking at me. I felt his presence invading my mind, exploring, digging inside my darkest thoughts. Then his mouth healed into an unnatural smile, a gesture too wide to be human, and when he spoke his voice didn't come out of his mouth but from everywhere. "Welcome, Alex." His voice was like an echo in my bones. "We've been waiting for you." I didn't think about it. I stepped on the accelerator and turned sharply in the opposite direction. The car skidded and I went out on the road. But when I looked in the rearview mirror he was still there, not moving, without even turning his head, just smiling. I drove blindly, taking random turns, trying to flee. But each street looked the same, each house was identical to the previous one, and worse, something told me that every turn I took brought me closer to him. Finally I saw a different house. The porch was lit and there were shadows moving inside. People, real people. I stopped suddenly and ran to the door, knocked frantically. After a few seconds an old lady with kind eyes opened up, looked at me with concern. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "you arrived just in time." She took my arm and ushered me inside. The interior of the house, it was warm, cozy, smelled of tea and old wood. The woman who showed up as Margaret led me to a table and offered me a steaming cup. My hands were still shaking as I took it. "Please," I managed to say, "tell me where I am." Margaret sighed. "You're not the first to get here. Alex here. Where is it here?" She looked at me sadly. "This is an in-between place." A chill ran down my spine, intermediate between our world and something else. I tried to process her words. This didn't make sense, but at the same time something in me, I knew it was true. Margaret continued, "This place catches those who are lost not only on the road but in life." I felt a lump form in my throat. She was right. I had been running from my past, from my failures, from all the decisions that had led me to this lonely and empty life. And he asked, feeling a chill at the memory. Margaret became serious. "Some call it the guard, others the collector. What does he want from me?" "Wants what everyone trapped here you have," he said, looking at me with regret. "Your desperation." Before I could answer a sound came from outside, the screech of tires on the pavement. Margaret turned pale. "He found you." The sound of tires screeching in the street made me jump out of the chair. Margaret got up urgently and took my arm. "You have to go, Alex. Now go. Babble how there's no way out." "Yes, there is," she said, "but only if you face what you've been avoiding." The floor shook slightly. I grabbed the table so I wouldn't lose my balance. From outside, a voice came through the front door. Alex crooned, prolonging my name as if savoring every syllable. "Don't run away any more," was her voice. "The guardian, the collector, whatever that thing that had been stalking me since I walked into this." He looked at me gravely. "If you face him you can escape, and if I don't," his eyes darkened, "then you'll stay stuck here forever." A shiver ran down my spine. I had no choice. The ground shook again, the lights blinking. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. The voice behind the door became more insistent. "You don't have to fight," when it whispered, "alone. Accept it." Margaret squeezed my hand tightly with a lump in my throat, headed for the door, put my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath and opened the icy air. Hit me squarely. The guardian was standing in the street, his tall, dark figure illuminated from the faint glow of the street lamps. His face, pale and sinister, was still smiling. Finally he whispered, "You understand, you understand." I didn't answer, I couldn't, but deep down I did. I was the problem. I had been running all my life, from my failures, from my regrets, from my fear of not being good enough. This city, this labyrinth with no way out, was a manifestation of my own mind, and the guardian was my shadow. My fear turned into something tangible. "I don't belong here," I said in a voice firmer than I expected. The guardian gave his head. "For sure, you've been running away for years. Why not stay a little longer?" I felt something inside me change. The fear dissipated. Nom. The guardian stopped smiling. "No, I'm not going to stay. I won't keep running away." The ground under my feet, the false city, began to crumble. It was fading like a painting fading in the rain. The houses were crumbling. "If you leave, you won't be able to go back." I smiled. "That's the idea," the guardian screamed. The sound wasn't human. It was the lament of something old, something that was falling apart. The world around me turned white, a flash of light, a void, and then I opened my eyes. I was in my car, parked on the side of the road. The sun was coming up. My GPS was working again. It showed my correct location as if I had never deviated. I looked around. There were no identical houses. There were no dead ends. There was no trace of the guardian. Only the open road and the city in the distance. I drove silently, my mind still processing what had happened. It had been real or just a nightmare caused by tiredness. I didn't know, but what I did know was that something inside of me had changed. Since that night I stopped running away, faced my mistakes, accepted my failures, stopped fearing that my life would never have a direction. And when I occasionally drove at night and saw an unfamiliar neighborhood, I made sure to keep my eyes on the road, because somewhere in some corner of darkness I knew he was still waiting. Waiting for someone else to get lost, waiting for someone else to run away. 'Cause as long as fear exists, there will always be a guardian lurking in the middle of the world. The email arrived at 3:17 in the morning. The subject line made my blood run cold. "I know what you did. As a true crime podcast creator, I'm used to diving into the darkest corners of humanity, but I never thought I'd become the subject of my own investigation. My name is I have been the voice behind Call Case Confessions, a podcast dedicated to shedding light on unsolved crimes. It began as a hobby. But as my audience grew, so did the responsibility I felt towards the victims and their families, the case that they had been working for. What changed everything was the disappearance of Lily Chen, a 19-year-old college student who disappeared without a trace 5 years ago. Her story had always haunted me, perhaps because she was the same age as me, or perhaps because the details of her case were so frustrating, vague. I had been researching her life for months, interviewing her friends, family, and even suspects that I had already ruled her out. I felt that I was close to something big, and it was then that the mail arrived. At first I dismissed the mail as just another joke or a troll. My podcast had become popular enough to tie up its share of lunatics, but something in this message felt different, more personal, more threatening. I opened the mail with trembling fingers. Message was short. "Hello, Key. I've been enjoying your little podcast. It's cute how you think you're helping, but this time you're getting into something too much big. Stop investigating Lily Chen's case, or you might end up like her. I know what you did that night in the lake cabin. For real, do you want that information to come out?" The mention of the lake hut made my blood run cold. How could they know about it? It was a secret I had buried deep. Only 2 people in the world knew the truth, or so I thought. I slammed the laptop shut, feeling like my heart hammers in my ribs. This had to be a hoax, but the reference was too specific to be a coincidence. I couldn't sleep that night. I spent it walking around my small apartment, reliving that night in my mind over and over again. The summer after high school. My best friend is her boyfriend Tyler. The cabin, the accident number. I couldn't think of it now. I would focus on Lily's case. I wouldn't let an anonymous message scare me. If someone wanted me to stop investigating, that just meant I was close to the truth. I spent the next few days immersed in the case. I went through old files, interviewed more witnesses, tracked down clues that I had previously discarded. But the emails kept coming, more and more disturbing. "You're on the right track. Almost, but you're looking in the wrong place." The answer: "It's closer than you think. I saw your red sweater today. It fits you well. The guilt in your eyes stands out." When I read that last message I felt short of breath. This was not just an online stalker. Someone was watching me. My paranoia grew. I began to notice suspicious figures on the street. A man in a dark coat standing outside my building. A woman who seemed to follow me in the supermarket. It was real, or just my imagination ran While my podcast started to suffer, my voice didn't sound confident in the recordings anymore. My analytics weren't as sharp, but I couldn't stop. No, now the clue that changed everything came from a comment on my last episode. Hey, almost great episode. One was just wondering, have you investigated Lily's high school boyfriend? I heard he moved out of state right after she disappeared. I froze. By why hadn't I thought about it before? I had always focused on her college life. I had never delved into her past. In high school, I searched Lily's archives and there was her name. Jason Mercer, her boyfriend of 2 years. They broke up a month before she disappeared, and yes, she had moved out of the state. Shortly after, the next 48 hours were frantic. Jason Mercer had changed his name. But I tracked him down to a small town in Oregon, worked as a mechanic and had a record. A domestic violence complaint, a DUI, nothing that would make him guilty, but enough to make me suspicious. I booked an immediate flight. If this was the key to solving Lily's case, I had to see it with my own eyes. But just as the plane was taking off, my phone vibrated with another mail. You're making a big mistake. Almost. Turn around now or everyone will know the truth about Sarah. Sarah. The name hit me like a punch in the chest. Sarah was the reason it had all started, the reason Zoe and I took that oath, the reason we never talked about the lake cabin. How could this person know about her when they landed Oregon? She had already made up her mind. She had to see this to the end. Jason Mercer was the key, the I found in his mechanic shop. He was crouched over the hood of an old car. When I called his name, he slowly straightened up, and when his eyes fell on me, I saw the immediate recognition on his face. You are, the girl from the podcast murmured. I nodded with my heart pounding in my chest. Jason, I need to talk to you about Lily Chen. His lips trembled. I could see his face set before my eyes. I knew this would happen. He whispered and then he started talking. What he said, it took my breath away. Jason confessed. He and Lily had fought the night she disappeared. He pushed her harder than he wanted to. She fell, hitting her head when he realized she wasn't breathing. He panicked. He buried her in the woods behind his house. I've lived with this for 5 years. I'm daring. I thought about turning myself in many times. But I was a coward. I recorded everything shaking, holding my phone tightly. It was the proof I needed, the truth I had fought so hard for. Lily would have justice. Her family would have answers. But as I left the workshop, my phone vibrated one last time. Congratulations. So you solved the case. Now it's time to face yours. See you tonight at the lake cabin. Come alone or Sarah's story will be made public. At that moment, I knew my nightmare wasn't over. I was just starting. The road to the cabin was the longest of my life. Every mile I got closer to the memories I'd tried to bury, to the night that changed everything. When I arrived, the silhouette of a woman was waiting for me at the dock. I recognized her instantly. I'm my best friend, the only person besides me who knew the truth about Sarah. She smiled, but his eyes were cold. Hello, Cass, it was you. I whispered. The emails, all this. So he crossed his arms. I couldn't let you expose Jason without facing your own past. The truth is a double-edged sword, almost, and it's time for you to face yours.